Thank you. Welcome, committee members. This is 8:05 a.m. We're going to get started. It's good to see you after a few hours. It looks like we have a quorum. We have myself, Vice Chair Carey, Member Wood, and Member Hart. And staff, will you let me know if I don't see, just let us know when Member Lear gets in, so we don't pass her up for any conversation or votes if you see her before we do. But let's go ahead and get started with our Law and Licensing Committee meeting this morning. We have a full agenda. That's why we're starting at 8 a.m. We don't have any public comment at this point, so we'll skip agenda item 1.1 and jump straight to agenda item 1.2. This is a research data sharing agreement with the University of Virginia. And I believe we have Katie Chalice, who is going to queue us up. Is that right, staff?
Yeah, I'm here, Chair.
Perfect. Katie, please.
So you just like an overview of the request?
Yes, please.
Okay, awesome. And just so you know, one of the researchers is available on the call in case committee members have any questions about the research scope.
Perfect. Thank you.
So this is a research request from a researcher that is at the University of Virginia, and she's also partnering with Dr. Natalie Bowman. Dr. Bowman is the one that's on the call today. And we've had several agreements in the past with Dr. Bowman. So while this is a new research project and a new request, there's been a history of sharing with her as a researcher in general. So the goal of the primary goal of the research project is to identify kind of outcomes for English language learners or English learners. My inclination, I'll tell you a little bit about the data being requested, and then rather than get into the scope of the research, my inclination is to let Dr. Bowman speak to that if she wishes to. I'll just say the data set is pretty expansive. So because they're looking for longitudinal results, the data set begins in 2010 and then goes up through 2020. And the focus is on primarily K through 5 students.
Thank you. Okay, are you still going?
Chair
Yeah,
Hymas,
I just
Chair.
was going to turn it over to you.
Yes,
Chair
go ahead.
Hymas, you said to let you know when Member Lear was here. She just came into the office.
Perfect. Thank you and welcome, Member Lear. And I don't know how to tell. Usually we raise a hand virtually, but I don't know how to tell if Member Lear has a comment. So it might be a little informal today. We have some with cameras on, some with cameras off, and the hybrid. So please speak up with any questions. I guess I have a question for Dr. Bowman. Can you help us understand? I mean, you're probably aware that Utahns are very private people, I guess. They don't like to get their data out, some of them. That's what we are experiencing here. Can you help us understand what you want this data for and how it's going to help our Utah students?
Yeah, so it's purely research purposes. We're academics, but in saying that, right, our academic focus has always been with an applied mindset. So I was a elementary school teacher years ago, worked with a lot of English as a second language students, which is where I came into this. The other researchers on the team, Natalia Palacios, Min O, and Bethany Bell, they're all at the University of Virginia. And Natalia is immigrant Latino. So this is where our focus has been in part for her, because there's this strong affiliation, I guess, psychological affiliation with what's happening with these kids, right? Min also is English as a second language. She's from China. So there's a big concern on all of our behalf of what's happening with our English learners in the United States. And the beautiful thing about Utah is that you have amazing data. You have a lot of English learners, but you also, when we look at the comparison of your populations to the population across the United States, which is not what most people think because they think Utah is lily white Mormons, right? It's not. It looks very much like the representation of the US with the percentage of English learners, the percentage of different minority groups. And so you're a really nice case study for the broader US and what's happening in the broader US. So that's kind of us and our motivation. Our motivation, though, is that with a lot of our research is that we know that our English learners enter schools and historically they struggle. And our goal is to understand what are part of those struggles, what are changing the trajectories for those kids, and what we can do in the education system to make changes to the education system to change those trajectories in the right direction, right? So that's really at the heart. We never ask for personal information, right? So as the students of Utah are representative of the United States, that's enough for us to be able to say, look, we can look at what's happening in Utah and we can generalize that to what's happening across the US for a lot of these kids. But we do not ask for personal information. And so knowing that, sharing with your folks, that piece, right? That we're not trying to dive into personal lives, but this is personal in that we want to change trajectories for kids. We want to make sure that we understand why they're not successful. In particular, in this data sharing agreement, we're looking at not only English learners, but we're also looking at subgroups within the English learner population, particularly kids who are diagnosed with special needs. There is, you guys probably know this given the space that you're in, but what happens a lot of times with English, yeah, Molly.
Molly, you're muted, I believe.
I don't mean to stop you. I just wanted to be in the queue.
Oh, okay. What happens a lot of times with English learners is they come into our school systems, and because their second language, it takes us a while to figure out for those special needs kids, is this a language issue or is this a special needs issue, right? It is as a teacher, it's a really tough space to be in, right? Because you're not really sure as you're interacting with these kids, is there something else going on here that's keeping them from being successful early on academically? Or is this a language thing? And once the language is in place. And so this particular data sharing agreement is looking at those English language learners who are also special needs as a subpopulation. A lot of families then, because of the way the education system works, feel like they are in a position where they either have to choose services for special needs or choose services for English language learners, right? And so we get kids who are special needs that waive the English language service, English language learner services, right, in the schools. And so we're interested in looking particularly at that population, is who are the people who are waiving? Are these is it really what we think from other research, a higher percentage of kids who are diagnosed with special needs? And then how do we understand those subgroups and what's happening with those kids in schools? Because only can we get really once we get a handle on what's happening with those subgroups, when multiple things are happening with kids, can we begin to then make changes to state policy, school policy about how we serve kids?
Thank you, Dr. Bowman. Member Hart?
Yeah, so I get all, I'm following along. And it's, important research. What I'm wondering about is what you're using, the percentage of my still there, what the teacher certification, is that a control variable? Are you what are you doing with the teacher ELL certificate and bilingual certificate information?
Yeah, those are control variables
Okay.
to understand, where these kids are being placed. But also sometimes what happens in schools, if somebody has an ESL certificate or a bilingual certificate, then kids don't necessarily have to be pulled out of class or have an additional teacher, right, to get their needs met. And so we want to understand, who is working with these kids as controls.
Okay. And you're not using special education teacher controls?
We're using the regular classroom teachers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Hart. Member Carey?
Yeah, good morning, Dr. Bowman.
Hi.
When I got my master's a long time ago, the way research was done is we had to come up with a hypothesis, and we gave the research some directionality, and then we tested that hypothesis. The research you're looking to conduct, is there an operational hypothesis right now? And if so, what is it?
So this is exploratory research. So we're not trying to predict particular outcomes for kids in that regard. There is some prior research that I referenced earlier that looks at English language learners who are also diagnosed with special needs. A lot of that work has been done with older kids. And so understanding what's happening with younger kids in schools is really the first step in then thinking about, okay, then if we change services in this way or under certain circumstances, right, do those lead to different outcomes? So there's not a preconceived hypothesis, if you would. It's much more exploratory to be able to document what's happening with these kids in schools to understand their experiences.
Thank you. And Chair, may I have just 2 follow-up questions?
Yes, go ahead. Can I just do a non-conventional interruption real quick? And this is for our committee members. I am going to drive in. Member Carey is driving. I don't feel like it's safe to chair and drive at the same time. I hope that's fair. And so I've asked Vice Chair Hart to chair while Member Carey and I are on the road, if that's acceptable. So if it is, Vice Chair Carey, I'm good with you asking a couple questions, and I'm going to turn things over to Carol or to Molly, and I'll see Carol at the offices. And Joe, and yeah, I know it's crazy this morning, but thank you. And thank you, Dr. Bowman, for the interruption and allowing us to get things situated this morning.
No, you guys need to be safe first and foremost.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Carey, go ahead.
Thank you. Dr. Bowman, is the research you're conducting, are you conducting this in multiple states or just Utah?
Yes. So we have submitted a very similar data sharing agreement to another state, and had very similar conversations with their research privacy teams that we had with Katie and her team to make sure that we were there was overlapping data, is a good way to put, right? Because some states collect certain data, and other states don't necessarily collect that same data. So we had a lot of conversations, both with Katie and her team, with Aaron, and then with the team in the other state in Georgia, to make sure that we were requesting data that we could then pool together, and it would be more representative of what's happening across the US.
Thank you. And I guess it's Vice Chair Hart. Can I ask a Director Chalice question?
Absolutely. Just go ahead.
Thank you.
And
Director
Molly,
Chalice,
Molly, excuse me. Can they hear me? Molly, I have a question too when Joe's finished.
You're in the queue.
thanks. Director Chalice, I've heard, I think it's several times now, once today and twice before when this matter was being discussed internally at USBE, that this is longitudinal, that it's a pretty big request for data. The costs associated with pulling the data and getting it over to Dr. Bowman and her team, are those costs being covered by Dr. Bowman's team? Are they de minimis? Can you just address that, please?
Yeah, you bet. I think the scope, while it is a multi-year data request, there's nothing about this request that is especially onerous for our data and statistics team to pull this data.
Okay, so you're saying there really is no substantial cost that we will incur in either in terms of time or financial outlay?
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly right.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Hart. Thank you, Dr. Bowman.
Yeah. Go ahead, Member Lear.
I had more a comment than a question. I looked through this. We've had discussions of these kinds of contracts many times. I'm really not an expert in any of the content of these agreements, but I have looked at data privacy for many, many years. And I've also been assured increasingly every year that Utah has one of the strongest set of protections for student data privacy. And again, we know we're leaders in the country in terms of our data processing or data privacy protections for students and our programs. And I'm kind of having this big lead up to say that I believe if Katie is telling us that data will be secure, they will be secure. And we have such our achievement with EL students is so troubling and so below others that if we can do something like this, that will give us more information about how to provide better instruction, how to bring them up to the same level as our non-EL students, then it's really worth using de-identified data that are very secure and doing this well. So I just want to say I support this. I'm ready to make a motion when you're ready.
It sounded like you were leading up to a motion.
So I move, and if somebody, I can see it right here. I move that the committee approve the research data sharing agreement with researchers at the University of Virginia and forward it to the board for approval.
All in favor, please. Well, actually, you guys are online, so let's do voice vote on this one. Carol?
I'm a yes.
Okay. Leanne?
Yes.
Member Jaimes?
Yes.
And
Oh boy, I'm gonna take it personally.
Member Carey, I saved the best for last.
Yeah, I'm a yes as well. Thank you.
Okay, I'm a yes as well. That's unanimous. Thank you, team.
Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you,
so
Dr. Bowman,
much.
for being with us.
We truly appreciate if I could take 30 seconds.
Sure.
Working with Katie and her team over the years, not only on a previous data sharing agreement, but on this one in preparing it, they are amazing. They are incredible. I have been in Montana Montana, not so easy to work with. So my home state, not so easy to work with. Utah and that team, they are just wonderful. So
Thank
keep
you.
them, hold on to them, thank them, and thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Next up, we have the teacher and student success. It's an amendment. Who's leading on this one?
I'll start out if that's all right, Chair Hart. And it sounds like you can hear me since you're nodding. This is Angie Stallings here in the USPE office. This rule is being amended due to the passage of House Bill 308. You may remember in June, we addressed two rules that were being amended related to the passage of this bill, and I believe this is the last one. The Teacher and Student Success Act program, as you know, is a program that sends a number of funds out to LEAs for them to create their own school level plans for funding. And the schools have some different flexibility when it comes to how they create their plan depending on their student outcome scores or their accountability scores. And so because we are eliminating the single rating, and Ben, if you could go ahead and pull up the draft rule and then scroll down, I had the line number just a moment ago and my screen, I'm trying to adjust my screen here. If you could scroll to line, it really starts at 149. Yeah, 150. Yes, thanks, Darren. That you will see there the benchmarks. And so I'm Assistant Superintendent Nielsen is available, and he has worked with his team as well as gathered feedback on what the replacement benchmarks and total points should be. So Chair Hart, if it's okay with you, I would like to turn the time to Assistant Superintendent Nielsen and just show that the only edits are right there that you're seeing on your screen. So he could speak to the technical and substantive aspects.
Excellent. Go for it.
Okay, thank you. And Angie is correct. There were three rules that were impacted by the passage of House Bill 308, removing the overall school rating from the school accountability system. And this is the last one that's coming before the board. Is the least time sensitive. We appreciate the committee providing time on your agenda to talk about this today. Once the legislation was passed last March, we added this item to the agenda for the Assessment and Accountability Policy Advisory Committee, which met on May 11th. There was a review of this rule, and there was discussion with the group about what recommendations to bring forward to the board. And I'll read in the backup, this information is there, but I'll just read it for the community's good. That committee on that day, as they talked about the change to this rule related to the Teacher Student Success Act, they said they hope that the board would be as generous as possible for schools, and that any related changes that are made don't increase the number of schools that are required to, in the legislation, the language they use there is demonstrate at least a 1% increase in the school's total points, and that's in 53G 7-1306. So the recommendation that you see from us bringing forward today is consistent with that recommendation from Assessment Accountability Policy Advisory Committee. In the statute, 53G 7-1306, it establishes that the board shall make rules that, and these are the two elements, using a criteria setting process, determine a threshold of points under the statewide school accountability system that designates a school as exceeding in school performance and student academic achievement. And I think I'll just highlight that word succeeding. So the criteria setting process, the board accomplished that several years ago when we went through a standard setting process related to the new school accountability system at that time, which was originated in legislation from 2017. So that's a check on that. And then B on that, the board needs to determine performance standards for a school described in that section. You'll see previously the board identified a overall school rating of commendable or exemplary as meeting the criteria of succeeding. There's other designations in the school accountability system, that standard setting process that the board had staff go through. You have exemplary, commendable, typical, developing, and critical needs. Typical would be associated with the school receiving a C grade, commendable would be a B, and exemplary would be an A. The recommendation you see here for the 43.5% or more of the total points in the school accountability system for middle or elementary and 46 for high school would include or would be stating from the board's perspective that a school that has what previously would have been considered exemplary, commendable, and typical would meet the definition of succeeding in school performance. And that's our recommendation to the board in relationship to this rule change. And I'm available for questions at this point.
Group, are there any questions? Go ahead and just
Molly,
go.
I have a
Yeah,
question.
great.
Darren, essentially, did we just lower the bar?
If the board moves forward with this, that would be correct. The previous criteria that you see there was only was inclusive of schools that had a commendable or an exemplary school rating. Should the committee and the board decide to stay consistent with that, then the recommendation would be 55% for elementary schools and 57% for schools that enroll students in grade 12. So we're prepared to provide you those thresholds as well.
Follow up?
Yes.
How did we, is there like a rubric or something that says what a 50% school looks like? I mean, there's got to be something, right? Nobody's just saying, oh yeah, they get about 50 and, you know, what do we have?
It's off your scales on your yearly, on that, what do we call that? You know, the thing that your school gets with the things that look like gas gauges?
Yeah.
School
Yeah,
report.
I know you're talking about, like, who makes that though? Where does that originate from? Does it change when staff changes? You know what I mean? Like, where it's.
Yeah, that's a great question. It goes back to the first, as I read the language from 1306, 53 G7 1306. The board was required to use a criteria setting process to determine a threshold of points under the school-wide accountability system. That process, we brought in the Center for Assessment, some educators back when this school accountability system was originated in 2017 and established those cut scores. It was a very similar process to what the board has done on establishing cut scores for the various statewide assessments. So RISE, for instance, the cut scores that set the breaks for what students' performance ratings are, whether they're meeting or exceeding expectations. Those are established through a very similar process, and that was conducted previously.
Thank you, Darren. And then Molly, one more quick question. I think I can support this motion that is not yet out there, but that has been recommended, and we can discuss that. There might be a different motion from a different committee member, but I worry about lowering the bar too much. I know that we're trying to get things in place and take care of our students as we lower the bar here, and maybe that's the wrong term. I mean, but are we still in a good place for our students, Darren? Are you seeing that we're still taking care of our students? Or are we just saying, okay, we're going to lower the bar so that schools can look better?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how to answer that. I would say what we're doing with adjusting this threshold is consistent with the APAC of trying to be as generous as possible for schools. And then remembering that what happens if a school doesn't, if the board moves forward with this, or if we use the previous example, if a school doesn't receive a commendable or exemplary school rating, what that does effectively is it allows the district that they work for to have more authority over the Teacher Student Success Act funds that are delivered to the school through the LEA. So the consequence or the impact, the effect of where a school falls on this overall these determinations, the impact then falls to changing the authority of the funds, some of the funds that are distributed through this Teacher Student Success Act, away from the school making the decision point, back to the district leadership having more authority over some of those funds.
Do you have a follow-up, Member Hymas? Ooh, we might have lost him for a second. Any other questions?
No.
Oh,
Molly, can you hear us? Or can you see our buttons, our lights, or? should we-
well, I'm working on adjusting my screen so that I can.
Or should we just butt in? Is that that's what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm asking, since we've got people driving, just go ahead and butt in.
Okay.
I just don't want people to have to mess with their buttons while they're driving.
Okay, thank you. That's smart. I think we're in a catch-22 about these kind of programs. And I know we've been trying to find the right metric for this one for a while. It seems like we're always discussing it. But nobody really likes assessments. Everybody would rather get rid of assessments for the most part, thinks they're time-sucking and kind of like our meetings. And really not very sometimes counterproductive. But we also then, like Member Hymas just said, we want to be rigorous and we want to look like we're setting a high enough bar. And I think we need to make up our mind. If we have assessments and they're a necessary evil, then let's set the bar where it's as painless as possible until we maybe can work better with the legislature to have the kinds of assessments we think are not distracting in the classroom and are helpful for teachers. So I don't have a problem with changing the metric, whatever you want to call it. And I think partly we've got to adjust our mindsets of, are we going to embrace assessments or are we going to just put up with them? So with that, I have a motion if all of you are ready. And because I fully support this and think that if Darren's telling us this is the right metric, I trust him. So can somebody give?
Can I do a quick question?
Oh, never mind. Leanne has a question who just came.
Sorry, I am in person now. Quick question, lowering the metric. Can you tell me the funding, is it associated? Is there a formula where that they get this funding, or is it associated? Does this impact the amount of funding that the schools get? If you have more schools, are we spreading it thinner, or will they get the same amount that they've gotten in the past?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know if we have somebody on here who can speak to the financial component better than I can. I do believe I can answer your question, though, in that the amount of funds allocated through the Teacher Student Success Act doesn't change or isn't differentiated by where the schools fall into these categories. What is impacted through this, and I'll use the term accountability, but I'm going to put it in quotations because this is really loose accountability for the Teacher Student Success Act funds. What it does impact is, or could impact, is how much of the funds is allocated to the school through the LEA, that they get to make specific decisions about its use versus the district leadership and the local board of education having more authority to make some determinations about how those funds are spent at that particular school.
Yeah, and I've had, just to follow up, I've had principals that in my district who very much said this is, some of the best money they have to be able to really pinpoint their projects that support their students. So I would love to know if there's anyone who can speak to the financial aspect of it, because if they expect a certain amount and then we lower the bar and therefore open it up to more schools, does that?
Is Tracy on? If not, I can handle this one. No? Okay, so Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning. I used to run the Teacher Student Success Act before we transferred it to Tracy. The way it's calculated, this would have no impact. So I think you're safe. Thank you for that consideration.
Yeah, my understanding is that what happens is the money is going to go out. The question is how much flexibility or, oversight will the school have to get the money
Perfect. That's exactly what I needed to know. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, we're ready for a motion then.
All right, my motion is that the committee approves R277-927 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay, if we could vote, Member Hymas? We might have
Yes,
lost.
I got it.
Oh.
Sorry.
Okay, Member Carey,
Yes.
Member Lear,
Yes.
Member Wood,
Yes.
and I'm a yes, so that's unanimous. Thank you, team. And moving on to the next item. Who's teed up for the, I'm sorry, I'm
Me.
getting a little bit of a echo, so I struggle, but just go ahead.
Thank you. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. I'll start out. And we'll be joined by Todd Call and of course, Assistant Superintendent Nielsen, as well as potentially, I'm not sure if Deputy Jones will be joining us, and Aaron Bruff is also here to support. So this rule, R277419, first we'll show you the amendment. So you can see the only amendment in the rule, it would be to strike the effective date. What the impact of that would mean is this rule would not sunset at the end of the 23-24 school year, but would continue on in perpetuity until the board is ready to make amendments. So that's the only change, assuming that the committee and the board want to take the staff recommendation. So now, Ben, if you could go to the PowerPoint slide, I believe it's titled, it's the backup, yep, the public accounting, pupil accounting backup information. So we're going to go through about 6 slides just quickly. I just want to refresh board members' memory on the history, or at least the work of the board related to this rule over the past couple of years. So, and you can go to the next slide, Ben. As you may remember, prior to 2021, prior to COVID, the R277419 previously required 990 hours of instruction to be provided over 180 days. The rule also provided a minimum school day definition, which required at least 4 hours of instruction in grades 1 through 12. Beginning in the 21-22 school year, the rule was amended to remove that 990-hour requirement, as well as removing the minimum school day definition, as well as some other, I don't know if we'd call them micromanaging, but they were very specific provisions related to whether you counted passing time in the halls, for example, or lunch or recess. All of those things were removed at around or just before the 21-22 school year, or in some of them may have even happened right before the 2020-21 school year. So beginning with the 21-22 school year, the rule was amended to remove the 990-hour requirement and to remove the minimum school day definition. And we continue to have the 180-day requirement. And just as a side note, that 180-day requirement is key and core to a lot of our distribution formulas. And so it's important, for now at least, that 180-day requirement continue. And then this current version of the rule, of course, as you saw a moment ago, is only effective through the 23-24 school year. That decision was last made in December of 2022 for the board to extend the rule for 1 additional year to give time to staff to do some research and provide a recommendation for the future of the rule. And the board directed staff to bring this issue to you today in August, to an August committee. Since that December timeframe, there's been approximately, I want to say 30 staff at USBE who gathered to talk about the impact of the 990 and other aspects on different elements of public education, we had participants from special education, child nutrition programs, of course, all many aspects of teaching and learning and student support. And we also, and I'm going to turn the time over to Todd Call, Director of Strategic Initiatives, in just a moment, but we also sent out a survey and had approximately 400 or around 400 responses from stakeholders regarding the 990 and the minimum school day. So that work has been going on with staff since that December motion, and we're ready to help share with you those survey results. So I will actually turn the time over to Director Todd Call to give a summary of the survey results and answer questions. And then we will end with the staff recommendation. He'll turn it back to me at that point.
Great. Thank you, Deputy Stallings, and thank you, committee members. Deputy Stallings did a great job of laying the landscape. And the data that you see here in front of you, well, first of all, sorry, I'm Todd Call, Director of Strategic Initiatives here at USVE. The data that you see in front of you comes from over 400 respondents across the state. And as was mentioned, we tried casting as wide of a net as we could and reaching out to as many stakeholders to ask them if the removal of the 990 hours requirement has been useful, if they recommend adding it back, and the same for the minimum school day definition. As we had conversations as a working group, and as was mentioned, we had anywhere from 10, 15, 20, or even more staff members attending each of our working group meetings over the last 6 months or so. We really leaned heavily on our data and stats team. Director Bruff really went through all of the data that their team has access to try to find anything that might help inform a recommendation. And we had one entire meeting dedicated to this conversation around, is there any data that we can lean on that shows either positive or negative impacts as a result of the removal of these two pieces? And he could speak more in depth and more intelligently to it. But the outcome was that there wasn't anything significant that could point either positive or negative as a result of these being removed. So we decided to lean heavily into this qualitative data, and we reached out to as many as we could. And the 400 respondents responded, as you see here in the survey results. 78% of them reported that the removal of the 990 hours requirement has been useful to them, and 64% recommended not adding it back to the rule. Similarly, with the minimum day definition, 77% recommended that it said that it's been useful to them having it not in the rule, and 56% of them reported that they would not recommend it be added back to the rule. You can see a breakdown of strongly agree and agree, or strongly disagree and disagree at the bottom in terms of how useful it's been. But based on these results and conversations that we had internally with our working group, Deputy Stallings and team have prepared a recommendation for the committee today.
Thank you.
Are there any questions?
The last thing I was just going to share is the actual staff recommendation, which you probably could deduce if you don't mind. It just, I mean, you could see it in this draft rule, and based on the survey results and the discussions of staff, we recommend leaving 419 as is, as we have for the 23-24, without an expiration date. So just deleting that sunset.
Thank
I
you,
can now
Deputy
go ahead and I mean, you're welcome to start discussion now. Thank you.
Vice Chair Hart, I have a question.
Please.
Do you have any specific comments of those who wanted it back, that what they felt they were missing, or what they, felt that it didn't do? And I know this is a huge stretch, but is there any tie into this in terms of absenteeism and stuff? If parents learn, oh, there's no requirement, there's no hours. I know that may be a stretch. And
Vice Chair, if I may.
Please, just go ahead.
Yes. So the survey was pretty short and simple, asking, do you agree, disagree, to what degree, has it been useful, yes or no? But in addition, we asked for any free responses from them to articulate why they felt the way that they did. And so we went through all the responses and broke them down into pros, cons, and neutral for each of the two pieces, the 990 as well as the minimum day. And I'm happy to share any and all of those. Are you interested more specifically in one or the other, or I can just speak to kind of the trends in general across?
The trends would be great.
You bet. I will say the biggest trend that we saw, whether they were in favor of adding it back or not, was that it didn't change their practice a whole lot. They communicated whether it's in or whether it's not, we're going to be really close to 990 hours. We're going to be really close to the same minimum day, if not more than what's been in the rule in the past. But we appreciate the flexibility and being able to meet the individual needs of our students or schools and local community context. So your question specifically around those that maybe wanted it added back would be those that said it either hasn't been useful for either one. And some of the things that were mentioned, it could potentially limit accountability, could limit the structure within education. The elimination of the requirement might lead to inconsistency in the number of hours provided by different schools was mentioned. And some expressed concerns about the potential negative impact on student learning, which is what we really wanted to understand. But as I mentioned before, there really wasn't anything that pointed to it having a negative impact directly or positive. Just it was neutral in that. There were several responses around absenteeism and truancy, and I don't know how to make a direct statement of how this impacts that or not, but there certainly were comments asking the question of, we wonder if, or does this have something in messaging around absenteeism, or is there more to be done in other rules that could help support that conversation? I would say that was kind of some of the general trends. I will say those that said it was useful and wanted to continue, they really spoke to the flexibility. They spoke to enabling schools to explore alternate models, and that they could decide that at the local level with their local boards, and that it's been beneficial for them in creating effective schedules for students.
So just a comment. It sounds like it's really about those that have kind of vision of flexibility and an ability to move forward in a different way than the way we've always done it, other than seat time and hours and days. But I would love, is there a way to move forward to understand if there is a messaging issue that we'll have with parents in this? Correlation does not causation, that whole thing, but we have seen a huge increase in our absenteeism. We know we have rules that we're dealing with it, bills that we're dealing with it. So it's an interesting, does the timing match? Like when we took away this, did we start to see this, or is it just because of the pandemic? So I don't know where that would go with that, but it'd be an interesting study to see if we could collect specific data on that.
And Board Member Wood, I don't know if either Director Aaron Bruff or Assistant Superintendent Nielsen want to say anything. Just know the invitation is there, because I know both of you have information related. If while you're thinking about that, I'm just going to add we do plan to have 3 LEAs present to the board when this discussion comes up in the board meeting next month. 2 districts and a charter who will be sharing their experience about why they think that removing the 990 it would be useful, and how they see it benefiting their districts and how they support student achievement and their schools in general. We decided to have them come to the board instead of here because we figured the full board would want to hear from them. So I wanted to let you know that also is coming. Anything you all would add before we turn back to board member questions? It looks like Aaron Bruff is going to be speaking, Chair Hart.
Okay.
There it goes. There. Aaron Bruff, Director of Data and Statistics. Thank you for the question. First off, it's probably too early to find any valid tests. When I say too early, I mean, we've only been into this now. Yes, we're ending about 3 years. A lot of the LEAs and their policies are still going with the attendance process. So they're still tracking attendance for their whole day. They're keeping all that information, but they're just submitting to us they were there for the day. And again, that 180-day component is really critical that we look at on the financial side of things. It also has to do with that full academic year indicator that we use for accountability. So when we say it's too early, most of the LEAs have not transitioned or are utilizing the learner validated program process. We on a separate study that we're working on, we actually just looked at that data.
I think Morgan, there's her entire future on this one, Susan.
Robert?
Why can't I hear anything? Swear to turn it
Say
off.
that again. Robert Palmer, your mic is on.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So with that said, just sharing that we've been looking at it. We will definitely be in the process of doing in-depth studies related to this, related to attendance, related to chronic absenteeism, related to truancyism, its impact that we're following up on what programs are being utilized. For example, utilizing the learner validated models and how effective these are appearing. Again, at this stage, it is really early. We don't have a large enough clean data set to actually start seeing those trends. Like Director Call said, it doesn't point anywhere. It doesn't say positive, doesn't say negative, and we ran lots and lots of tests. So thank you.
Molly, I have a comment.
Go for
Carol. I'm going to sound a little like Eeyore. I've been fighting this battle for years. I'm kind of a traditionalist, and partly because of where I live and the community I live in, where schools are more than just places to get ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, as some board members like to say. But I think this is where the train is going. And speaking for myself, I don't personally think board members are going to need a ton of presentations and convincing. There are probably, or most of them, that would just welcome fewer required hours, fewer required days. Let schools be totally flexible. Just trust us. And I think whether some people like me who are more, again, traditionalists, are reconciled to the fact that that's where we're going. And so I do fear for, and this is going to sound again like a little bit like Eeyore and a little bit like a fatalist, but I fear for the safety of children, because there can be less time in school, being supervised by school teachers and other aides and those people who care. There'll be kids who are babysitters. There'll be children who are unfortunately too young to be home alone. And I know I'm going on a bit, but I'm going on right now to say, I don't think we need a bunch of presentations. You're going to have most of the board members who are completely persuaded in this direction. And I don't know how we'll ever go back, which may be good. Maybe we'll come up with a really creative learning model and be there. But I'm glad we could hold on this long, because I think it's better for kids to be in school. So I'm with that. I'm ready to make a motion.
Carol, I can't have you dangle that kind of bait and not just say, this isn't us saying that school, isn't important. What it is it's shifting the decision making of it to the LEA, and it's, instead of having 2 different measures, it's asking for one. And I do think that we can't have one foot in the competency based model and learner validated and still have our foot firmly planted on the traditional seat time.
That's what I mean. But then, sorry,
Yeah.
and sorry, I didn't mean to cut you up, but that's what I mean by the train left the station, so.
Yeah. So go
Let's
ahead,
just,
Carol.
I say the train left the station, and will, my grandchildren will live with the consequences. And I hope it works out, in the way we hope. And I feel like, we've just got to look for creative opportunities to learn differently. And then I'll have to worry myself about the community of children who need schools, who don't have as many safe places in their homes to be, or who are more often babysitters because their parents or parent need them to do that. So the committee, I move that the committee approves R277-419 draft 1 on first reading, forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you. There is no second needed, so we'll go to a voice vote until our people are not behind the wheels of cars. Member Hymas?
Yes.
Member Carey?
No.
Member Lear?
Yes.
Member Wood?
Yes.
Member Hart is a yes. That passes 4-1. Thank you very much, team. And I concur, we may not need that we can talk with leadership about whether or not we need the assistance of pulling three leaders out of their districts.
Member Hart,
Yes.
I and Vice Chair Carey are both in the boardroom now.
Oh,
So
yay.
I'll take over if you don't mind.
Please. Thank you so much.
Hey, great job. That was the smoothest this meeting committee has ever been while I've been chair. So.
Your humor is enjoyed this morning. Thank you.
We're going to move on to agenda item 1.5, R277-620, suicide prevention programs. And Elise is going to cue us up for that.
All right. Thank you so much. So this is a continuation of the suicide prevention program rule, R277-620. However, there has been quite a bit of legislation that has been passed around this program. So we needed to make a few updates to the rule. There has already been lots of feedback on this. So staff wanted to make sure that everyone understood the context for the changes that we are proposing that we make. So Kathy Davis is here, and we've got a few slides prepared just to give you a little bit of context for the changes in this rule. So I will turn it over to her.
Good morning, everyone. Chair Hymas and Vice Chair Carey and other board members. I'm really happy to present the suicide prevention programs to you today. If you wouldn't mind, Elise, going on to the next slide. And I love this quote because I think it's really indicative of what we've all been through since the pandemic. It's the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. So I think we've really, especially I know in my position as suicide prevention specialist, I have to put on my galoshes and I have to go through some situations. I'm honored to be in this capacity. And I wanted to just cue you up on a few of the metrics respective to youth suicide prevention. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. I was able to meet with our suicide researcher. We are unique in Utah. We are the only state that has a dedicated suicide prevention researcher in the state. And Dr. Michael Staley has presented before in study sessions and is very, very acquainted with just the trends. And so we started out by saying that the suicide death rates among youth in Utah are alarmingly high. If you'll notice on this slide, you'll see that there's two key points, two key lines. And one is Utah. That is the youth suicide rate for our Utah youth. And then that's in the purple, and it's above the US. And you can see that consistently, and this goes back longitudinally since 1999, we have trended above the US as far as our suicide rate. And of note is, if you'll notice, between 2011 and 2015, that is a 151% increase in our suicide rate. And at that point, you'll see that in the next slides to come, when I talk about the legislative updates, we realized that it was all hands on deck to deal with this situation of our youth in Utah. If you'll go on to the next slide, I'll I'll talk to you about the metrics that I track. And these metrics are coming to you from the Student Health and Risk Prevention Survey. And this is a survey that is distributed to our 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders every other year. We had a survey year in 2023. However, I'm not able to release those results yet. They're still being finalized. But this, I know it's really hard to see, but I just want to give you a few key data points. So this chart displays data for 3 suicide ideation attempt questions that we have on the survey. And they're namely, have you seriously considered suicide in the past year? Have you made a suicide plan in the past year? And have you attempted suicide in the past year? So unfortunately, the 2021 data show that there was a continued increase in the 6th grade across all 3 questions. So we were alerted to that. And so also while we were showing some positive movement that we were trending in the right direction, we realized that the 10th grade suicide consideration and planning in 2021 showed a slight increase in grade 10. And then the 12th grade data showed positive decreases across all 3 measurements. So while some of the measurements are not moving in the direction we would hope, and I'm anticipating looking at the 2023 survey data, the increases we're seeing here are similar to what we've seen across past administrations. And so if you'll go on to the next slide, Elise, I'll show you the thing that I really want to monitor in addition to those 3 survey questions is if you have felt very sad, hopeless, or suicidal in the past 30 days, whom did you talk about it? And what we are really trying to do with our youth suicide prevention programs is promote help seeking amongst our young people. And you'll notice that since the inception of Safe UT, which is the crisis line and tip line, we've seen that's been highly effective. It's just one of the ways that we've used, with our community partners to address youth suicide. If you'll go into the next slide, I'm just going to go through this quite quickly. You'll notice that since this board rule was approved last, we've had several really significant legislative efforts and changes. So we had House Bill 346 that initially provided grants to elementary programs, highly successful program. A lot of folks realized that they had a need on the elementary school level to address the mental health needs. And so we, in the next year, in 2018, we upped the amount of money that we had been giving to everyone to $1,000 per secondary school. At this point, the elementary grant program was still in effect. And then if you go into the next slide, what we decided to do is also really bolster our school-based mental health efforts. So House Bill 373 increase our support to student support services. And then in 2020, we had some school mental health funding amendments to set standards for LEAs to implement approved mental health screening programs. As I know you've been aware, as you've been approving some of these programs. What was significant in 2021 was recognizing that students' mental health needs need to be recognized and that mental or behavioral health is a valid excuse for a school absence. But I think most significantly was what happened with House Bill 93 in the Youth Suicide Prevention Programs Amendment. And this is what is going to really prompt some of the changes within this rule for the amendments that we are seeking. And it divided the elements of youth suicide between elementary grades and secondary grades. I'll have a slide later on in the deck that'll show you what the breakdown is. And then if you'll go to the next slide. And really, I'm very, very proud of House Bill 481 in our last legislative session. And you'll note, and I just want to put a nod to Vice Chair Carey, because as we were adopting some of the board rules for this House Bill 481, he mentioned the need that social media is indeed a risk factor for our young people. And so in addition to the firearm safety and suicide prevention education materials that we distributed statewide to LEAs, we also included material with respect to social media, because we know that that is a definite influence on our young people. If you'll go on to the next slide. I really want to recognize the support that we've received from multiple government agencies, and the Utah State Board of Education. I want to thank you for all the support that I have felt over the past 9 years in this position. One thing that's significant is the Department of Health and Human Services was established with the merger of the Health Department and the Department of Health and Human Services. And so we had to also adapt our rule to reflect that change. We also work closely with the Utah Department of Veterans and Military Affairs. We've had a lot of success in our Purple Star schools to support our military families. The governor had a task force appointed, I think it's been about 3 years ago, in which we address the issues of our young people specifically. And then finally, I want to acknowledge the medical examiner's office and my ability to work with the Utah Office of the Medical Examiner in analyzing the data, looking at the trends, and then gearing our prevention efforts according to the data. If you'll go on to the next slide. Community agencies are also a very important approach for this. We have the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention with the voice of suicide loss survivors. You are probably well familiar with the Live On campaign. That is a statewide social campaign that we've had for the past couple of years. NAMI is the National Alliance of Mental Illness. And so I've just got one last slide. So if you'll go to the last slide, Elise. What I think is significant that we talk about what happened with House Bill 93, because what we're recognizing is we've got to approach suicide prevention differently with respect to developmental stages. So at the elementary level, we're addressing life-affirming education, resiliency, coping strategies, healthy habits, self-care, methods of strengthening the family, and not only the methods of strengthening the family, but also that youth relationship in their school, in their community. Then to go ahead and extend that to the secondary level, we are preventing youth suicide, decreasing the risk of suicide amongst our vulnerable youth populations, especially those who suffer from bullying, and youth suicide intervention. And then postvention is a technical term for how do we respond after a suicide to prevent further suicides. And most certainly we want to prevent copycat suicides, suicide clusters, etc. And we want to provide grief support on the long term for our family, students, and staff members that are affected by a suicide loss. I will turn the time back over to Elise. She's going to just give the recommendation, and then I am here and available for questions.
Thank you so much, Kathy. So the two major changes to this rule that we are bringing to you as a committee is to acknowledge the fact that these programs extend from elementary through secondary schools. So that's the major change. The second major change is acknowledging that we now are collaborating as an agency with lots of other agency partners and community partners. So those are the two changes that you'll see in draft 2.
Thank you, Kathy. And Elise, Vice Chair Carey?
Yeah, I think you'd be hard pressed to find many programs that deserve our attention or funds as suicide prevention. Having said that, the last time that I spoke with Specialist Davis and Elise, I requested some data regarding the number of our students who commit suicide, broken down by their grade level. And at that time, I believe I was told that we don't track our student suicides that way. Is that correct?
Vice
And
Chair,
so
yes, that is correct, Vice Chair Carey.
But then when I read the proposed rule, we track and measure by grade, not by age. We talk about 7th grade and 8th grade. So I'm trying to reconcile why we don't track our student suicides the same way that we track our suicide prevention, and if that makes a difference, or are we just saying that's semantics? And I'll defer to either presenter.
Elise, would you like me to take that?
Sure. Yes.
Great. What I'll do, and I'll try to explain this in terms that you can understand, because I had this conversation with Dr. Michael Staley yesterday. What I think a lot of folks need to understand is, for the most part, our suicides that take place are between the ages of 15 to 17, and below age 10, that is such a low frequency event that the N size is so small that I technically, and the Office of the Medical Examiner is not able to release that data because it is such a small number. And so what we do is we present the data in terms of rates, in terms of number of youth that have died per 100,000. And so what I did is, in my conversations with Michael yesterday, he said that because of the way IBIS, and that's one of the data tracking systems that they use, is set up, it's according to age, but he will have that capability to convert that to grade level. And he also, Vice Chair Carey, will make himself available if you have additional questions that you know what, he would be so happy to address to you, so that you can kind of understand how we address youth suicide.
Well, I hope it's not just for me. I hope that it would have some value for you. I mean, if we...
Oh, absolutely.
And I there's one thing you said that I don't understand, that the N size is so small.
So in other words...
I understand that, but what I don't understand is whether it's 1 or 10 or 20. You said the N size is so small, that's why we don't release it. I can understand why we couldn't draw conclusions from it, but certainly it's releasable.
Well, you know what, and then I'll probably have to defer to Dr. Staley so he can, because there are certain rules that he has to abide by in terms of, public information data, and what is, and a lot of times also everything happens year by year, and sometimes it can take up to 6 months to a year to finalize the death data and to be able to release it. And if it would be helpful, I can invite Dr. Michael Staley to also address some of your questions so that you can understand how the data is.
Can I interrupt? Just
yeah.
Kathy, and I'll
Yes.
just interrupt for a second. I understand that there are questions that are being asked regarding the rule. The suggestions before us. I'm wondering, Vice Chair Carey, if this is something that we can get data on, or if this is going to sway your vote, right? Because I get that we're trying to find out more about the program, the good that it does, and maybe make some potential changes later on. I'm just not sure if your questions are aligning to what has been discussed here. Can you help us?
Yeah, and that's a fair question. I just think, suicide prevention, like school security, it's a bucket that you can pour a lot of money into, and you don't get the best results. So there's no doubt in my mind that this is a good program, but is this the maximum ounce of prevention and value we can get? And I think we did the math last time. This is a program that costs taxpayers over $1 million. We saw that there are a bunch of other programs, and yesterday in our board meeting, we said, hey, I forget exactly what it was, but we wanted to prioritize and get a list of all these programs and the benefits they're offering. I guess that's what I'm driving at, but I certainly am not going to ask for this committee to postpone its vote on this. But I just wanted to reflect that I've requested this information. This is the second time I've requested it. And I believe this is one where we have to really monitor the efficacy. I don't think it's enough to say suicide prevention, let's throw more money at it. I really would like to say suicide prevention, is this the best program we're capable of doing for $1 million a year?
Right. And we want to be as efficient as possible, of course. And I would invite you, I mean, again, there's no motion on the floor and questions are always welcome. But I would invite any board member, whether we do it here or later, so in this instance, Vice Chair Carey, I would invite you to, after we've done with this, I think there's more digging to be done. I know you have more questions. So I'd invite you to continue to look into the program. And then if you see something that he's changed, I'm happy to make a better program as well. So I'd be happy to put my name on something that said, leadership, we want to bring this back. Here's what we've uncovered.
But having said that, I'm ready to make the motion on this,
please,
this matter. And that is that the committee continue and approve R277-620 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. The motion before the committee is that the committee continue and approve R277-620 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to the motion? Committee members, all in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. Perfect. That passes unanimously. Thank you, committee members, and Vice Chair Carey. I'm serious about putting my name to something if we need to bring it back.
Thank you.
Thank you, staff, for your help on that. We'll move to agenda item 1.6, R277-922, Digital Teaching and Learning Grant Program. And again, we're going to ask Elise to queue us up.
Oh, got it. Thank you so much. So R277-922 is a small amendment based on some legislation. And so the change, this whole rule has to do with when schools and LEAs apply for a grant for their digital teaching and learning programs. And previously, the rule had required that they do a readiness assessment every single time they apply for the money, which was getting quite redundant. And so this rule amends that and says that they only need to do the readiness assessment the first time that they apply. And then every subsequent year, it's just based on the previous year's grant application. And we have Rick with us with all of his expertise if you have any questions.
I don't have any questions. I think this is, for me, this is pretty cut and dry and very helpful. So Rick, I'm glad you're here. I don't know if we have any questions for you. Committee members, Vice Chair Carey, you have a light on? Okay, I'd accept a motion if there's no questions. Member Lear?
I'll make the motion if you'll put it on the board. I move that the committee approves R277-922 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-922 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Rick, kind of saying aye.
Okay,
Never
that,
mind.
passes with a vote of 4 and Vice Chair Carey had to step out. So
Muddled today.
thank you. And thank you, Rick, for being here and willing to answer questions.
You're welcome, and thank you for the approval.
Okay, we are looking at agenda item 1.7, R277-475. This is section 5, school instruction and sex education. And again, we'll be queued up by Elise.
Thank you so much, Chair. So this, just as a little bit of a context, the last time that we met in June, we were talking about how to deal with the legislation House Bill 439, which allows a student to refrain from aspects of school. At that time, we decided not to move forward with a separate rule. And so this is an amendment to another rule. This is the school instruction in sex education. And if you see draft 1 includes some changes to refer to section 53G 10205, which is the applicable statute. And it just states that a student may refrain from participation in this course material. So this is a course material having to do with sex education. And if they do so, that all will be in compliance with section 53G 10205.
Thank you, Elise. And I want to take a second to be respectful of the process. We see a draft 2 in here that Member Klein had submitted. Can you speak to that?
I can. Board Member Carey wanted to speak to that, so I don't know if we want to wait for him or if you'd like me to speak for that.
Since he's not here.
Yeah, I don't know if we can wait. We've got a pretty full agenda.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and speak to it. And Member Lear, did you have a comment before?
Yes.
Let me turn my.
There we go. Thanks. I just wondered when Elise does that, what would be helpful to me, because I just barely noticed it, that if you would tell us what the differences are, that's what I'm most interested in, because I've looked at the draft 1.
So this up here on the board is draft 2. This one was recommended by Board Member Klein. In some ways, it's very similar. It says the school shall act consistent with 53G 10205. And so that part is the same. The difference is where it says regarding any board approved core standards, requirements, competencies, or any aspect of school that may violate a student or a student's parents' religious belief or right of conscience. So the difference I would say is in those that is opening up to all standards right there, whereas before it just applied to school instruction and sex education.
Can I just clarify to make sure I'm understanding? So not being able to toggle quickly back and forth between them, it looks like she's just given more of the wording from that statute. Is that right? Than just citing the statute.
Question.
One of you, both of you, we only get 2 at a time.
Oh.
So one of you have to.
Oh, okay. Do I need to say that again?
No.
Does that do I need to say that again, Matt? Or
No, we got it.
okay, go ahead.
So yes, that is correct. It also opens it up to more standards than simply the sex education. The statute does as well. Yes, so this is just in this rule. The next rule that is actually up for conversation in this committee also has to do with this. And so that applies to all of the general standards. So we'll also be looking at that one in a second.
Chair, we also have Jody Parker here if you'd like to any more information on that.
Okay, I don't know how, I mean, for me, it's pretty simple. I prefer the simplicity of draft 1. I think that the code is referenced. I don't know how much, we don't need to reference a code and then spell out what the code means if we're going to reference the code. So for me, I prefer draft 1, but that's just one committee member's opinion. And we're going to hear from Member Wood.
Two questions. One, isn't it general practice to not, haven't we been told over and over again, if it references the code, don't duplicate the code, because then it's just 2 places. I think even Vice Chair Hart said that, don't put 2 things in 2 places that I have to look at as before. And then one other question, does this eliminate this? I mean, I'm looking at HB 348 as a whole. Does this eliminate the need for schools to have all the check the boxes? So I'd love to hear more how in practice you see this happening.
Chair, may I answer? Jody Parker, Health Education Specialist for the USB.
Looking for you on Zoom.
I'm here. I'm here. 53G-10402 and 403 are Utah code that outline the requirements for sex education. It is Utah is one of 2 states in the nation that is opt-in. We're not opt out, we are opt in for all materials regarding human sexuality. There's a list A through M. So no, Member Wood, the parental consent form is still required under 53G 10403, and anything that falls into that, you want 403. Driver.
Please.
Scroll slightly down and right, A through M. Yeah, up. Right there. So any of these topics that are on the screen, we're at A through G right now. It does go through M. Require parental consent opt-in. So students may not receive any instruction on any of these items unless there is explicit parental consent to opt into that instruction.
May I? The other thing I wanted to add, this is very similar to the conversation we had yesterday about the exclusion form. And the question being, how does 53G 10205, when it conflicts, if it conflicts with other sections of code, what's the impact? And one thing I thought about after I was able to give my comments last night, but I didn't want to reinsert myself once the conversation was going. And I wish Board Member Carey were here. But in general, when courts look at conflicts of statute, there's a rule of interpretation that says the narrow or the more specific trumps the general. So in both of these cases, for example, the exclusion form, and here with respect to sex ed, where you have very specific protocols and expectations with respect to notice, forms, opt-in, opt-out, something stating that a parent requests, etc., that would trump the more general rights or information on the right to refrain. Now, I don't want to say that that means a student doesn't have a right to refrain, because the student does always have that right to refrain, but it does not mean that LEAs may no longer have a process. So LEAs still could have a process by which they are allowing students to opt in, where they're notifying families they have an opportunity to opt out. That I don't personally believe that more general right to refrain means that we just get rid of all of our processes because students may refrain at some point. It's almost taking it to the extreme of why tell families that there's going to be a math test on Friday, because they could refrain from it. Do you see that kind of analogy? It doesn't mean we let go of all of our structure and processes just because a student ultimately has the right to refrain. So I just wanted to add that I agree with Jody, because that specific statute requires and states that students opt in. I don't think there's a big difference in the process, and you could still have many of the same processes in place, but just knowing that at some point a student could refrain.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment? I just want to appreciate that, because I think in this opening it up, we are not educating and informing parents. You get rid of the test opt out. We get rid of these forms. We don't inform parents of what's happening. It makes it worse. And I really appreciated your comment from last night, which I didn't get to say, in the courtesy of a parent saying, you know what, I'm going to opt out my child in whatever this is, so that the schools can be prepared.
Thank you, Member Wood. Member Lear.
I'm ready to make a motion if you're ready for that.
I'm ready as well. I'm trying to respect the process here of people outside of our committee working with committee. So I'm going to put a motion before the committee to vote yay or nay, yes or no, on draft 2. Would that be appropriate? Or you know what, we've discussed it, so you can make the motion. I'm just trying to be respectful, and we have discussed it, and so I can bring up that we've considered both drafts and discussed them. So please, Member
And to your
Lear.
point, I think we discussed the purpose for the differences.
Yes.
And I don't think we need to, though I agree, I want to be respectful. I don't think we need to necessarily belabor both drafts. And I do, it would be better, who knew we were going to go to the middle of the night last night, but it would have been easier if we could have looked at those, because I spent a lot of time Wednesday looking at this stuff, and it would have been nice to have seen that a little earlier. Having said that, my motion is the committee approves R277-474, Section 5, Draft 1 on first reading, forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-474, Section 5, Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
That passes with 4 aye votes and 1 absent. I will take a chair's prerogative here if I could. I know that Member Carey has things to say regarding this next agenda item. So out of respect for him, we are going to jump, if that's okay with committee, to 1.9, and we will come back to 1.8. So at this time, let's go to 1.9, R277-415, School Nurses Matching Fund. And we're going to ask Ben to cue us up on this one.
Thank you, Chair. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. Good to be with you this morning. So this rule was originally drafted to implement the School Nurses Matching Funds grant. The legislature still has that statute on the book, but they basically moved all the funding for the matching funds grant to the WPU, so LEAs don't need to apply for that grant anymore. So it's rendered most of the need for this rule obsolete. But there are a few provisions in this rule that staff do still feel is necessary. So what we were asking the committee to do is change this from a rule implementing the matching funds grant to a reporting rule, and to continue the reporting requirements of this rule alone. So the only thing that would remain in this rule other than the purpose statement is, I'm just scrolling down here to find it, is on lines 88 through 95. There are two data elements that we collect in conjunction with the Department of Health and Human Services. And so the staff proposal would be that we still require this so that we can see what's going on with funds used for school nursing, but beyond that, everything else in the rule would be stricken. Betty Sue Hinkson is our person with the Department of Health and Human Services that we work with on school nursing. She is on Zoom and can answer questions you have about the school nursing program and about these reports. And then we also have Leah Voorhees and Chantel Cota online who can answer your questions.
Thank you, Ben. Member Lear?
You partially answered this question. I'm wondering where the reporting requirements are coming from. You said something about we gather data in conjunction with. Is that accurate, or who is required? Because it doesn't seem like there's any that I know of any code requirements on school nursing information. So where's that coming from?
So the code, there's nothing in code. That was something that was created in this rule. I did look, and I believe it's that I did add to our authority and purpose statement because I think the board is justified in continuing to collect this data because we have authority to assess the effectiveness of programs funded by the minimum school program. And so where they're getting WPU funds to hire school nurses, I think that would be the code justification for this. But this is still carrying on just what we've established in this rule previously. It's just, we're just leaving it in the rule where we're taking everything else out.
Okay, and just a quick follow-up to that, if that's okay. I'm fine about that. I think it's important to know what LEAs are spending on school nursing. I think we all should be aware that this is the kind of reporting requirement that somebody might look askance and say, do we really need this? So I personally think it would be important to know because now it seems like we've consolidated school nursing money with everything else. And one of the concerns that school nurses had is it will be easy to not give money at all to school nurses. So I think we'll be able to see that from these data if we keep this in here.
Might be helpful to have Betty Sue kind of explain what they use.
I don't need that if that's,
Okay.
I don't know, Leanne may. But I'm fine about this and I support it. I'm just saying, let's be aware and have that explanation in the front of our brains when somebody says, this is just another reporting requirement. So with that, I'll make a motion if you're ready.
Please.
I move that the committee approves R277-415, draft 1 on first reading, forward to the board for approval on second final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-415, draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. With no discussion to that motion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes with 4 aye votes and 1 absent. Okay. We are on to our next item, 1.10, R277-437, open enrollment. This is a continuation, and we're going to have Ben cue us up here.
Yeah, this rule is up for its 5-year review. We don't really have any staff that are assigned to this rule, but we do have some provisions in here that govern how the open enrollment process works. We've reviewed it with a number of staff just to see if they see any issues or any need for change. All the staff that reviewed the rule felt that it was appropriate to continue this rule on. So the staff recommendation is just a motion to continue the rule.
I guess, Member Leary, you go ahead and start.
And I'm just going to say, I don't have any questions. I'm ready to, it's just a continuation, so I'm ready to make a motion.
Before we make that motion, can I ask, do any LEAs have any concerns with open enrollment? I know you talked to staff and I'm sure that they have connections, but no LEA concerns.
We brought this up with our USSA connections. They didn't have any questions about the rule. I haven't heard any other feedback during the public comment process leading up to board meeting.
I do
Perfect,
have a
thank you.
question. I have a question.
Yeah, Member Hart.
Is this on line 96? It says the superintendent may provide model policies. Is this a rule that we do have a model policy on? I'm asking for a friend.
Not aware of one.
Okay.
I don't think.
We'd have to get back to you on that. I
No,
don't think
it's okay.
gives-
I found out yesterday where the repository of model policies were, so I'm good. I just wondered if anyone happened to know. I'm ready for a motion.
Well, let your friend know that we'll look into it anyway.
Thank you.
And who's giving us some,
I
Molly,
said
was
it.
that you or Member Lear? Go ahead.
I move that the committee continue R277, or I guess it would be recommend to continue R277-437 on first reading, forward to the board for continuation on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee recommend to continue.
Is that maybe
verbiage?
just a minute.
Continue, that's fine.
Okay, you know what we're doing? Okay. The motion before the committee is that the committee continue R277-437 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation on second and final reading. Seeing no discussion to that, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes with 4 aye votes and 1 absent.
One comment before you move on.
Please.
Vice Chair Hart, there is a Utah State Board of Education standard open enrollment application model form on our website. I don't know that it's a policy, but there is a form there that might be helpful.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Angie. Okay, we're on to agenda item 1.11, Board Policy 5003, Student Data Policy Advisory Group. And we have an amendment here. And we have Katie Chalice, who's going to cue us up. Katie.
Thanks, Katie Chalice, Director of Privacy. This policy is kind of governs one of 3 data privacy advisory groups that are set forth in statute. There are kind of 3 primary changes in these amendments. One is adding some clarity regarding group membership. The second is establishing voting and non-voting members. And the third is providing more flexibility in the frequency of meeting. Board Member Lear can attest that sometimes, like the rule currently says that we're supposed to meet at least quarterly. And that has proven not to be necessary. So that's with that, I'll accept questions if anyone has any, Chair.
Member Lear?
Sorry, I'm not trying to.
There's only 4 of us, so
Well-
it might feel like you're talking a lot, but
Well, and I hope I'm not talking too long. I talked to Katie yesterday and I tried to do it earlier in the week, but events precluded that. So I would vote for this today, but I to talk to her. I've been participating on one of these committees, the acronym of which I cannot remember, since I've been on the board. And I think it's been helpful sometimes, redundant other times, unnecessary other times. But I talked to her about working maybe with the legislature and having one committee so that the feedback could come together with the LEA representatives and the state board members concerned and the legislature. There's always been a legislator that participates, but it feels like a lot of work for staff. And oftentimes when we met, when I served on this committee, it felt like we were just trying to find things to do. So I really would like to see our staff, and maybe this will come up today in our legislative discussion, maybe another time, work with the legislature, say, absolutely, we need feedback from constituent groups, but we don't need 3 separate committees. So, but I'll vote for this today because this is what we've got.
okay. Thank you, Member Lear. Even with may meet monthly or quarterly, even quarterly was too much?
It's not so much that the may meet and whatever didn't work. It was that we've got 3 groups, and I even forget the distinctions among the groups that are doing that same thing. And I found it sort of, when we were meeting in this particular group, there were members of other groups that I would have liked to have heard from at the same time. And so instead, Katie was kind of before Katie was bringing the information from other groups to our group. And it wasn't such a big group that we couldn't have all met together one time. That's my point. So it's not that there were too many meetings as much as that all the groups could have met together more efficiently, in my opinion.
Thank you, Member Lear. And I'm good with these amendments here. I just wondered if, I don't like to hold meetings for the sake of holding meetings either. But I wonder if we're missing out on an opportunity, if the work is out there, but we're not meeting about it, right? So sometimes the work is there, but it's not talked about.
I'll just tell you my experience, and that was that the staff did all kinds of things to keep us updated and involve the legislator who's been involved with these bills for a long time and all of that. And I still felt like it was sometimes unnecessary meeting time. And again, that's me. I don't like meetings either. And it felt like even a brief email could have done the same, could have accomplished the same. But I would have liked to have met more often with the broader group to hear, is this effective in LEAs? Do you really have your policy in place? How trained are your educators? How often do you do that training? Do you use the training that David Slay provided, and kind of getting to see how this was implemented, because we can still have breaches. We still have many teachers, it seems, that don't understand the importance of data privacy and caring for student information and don't understand FERPA. So I was just interested in meeting with more of the practitioners. So as more of a policymaker, I could see why we had those problems.
Can you, one last question. I know I'm asking you.
That's
and
all right.
Katie,
And I
you can jump
appreciate
in
that.
if you need
And
to.
Katie was been involved for a few years, but Whitney Phillips was here and then David was here briefly. And so, we've all had our experiences. But
I'm wondering who decides when a meeting is needed? Is there like is Is it staff? Is it a member of the committee? Is it you, Carol, as a board member
I
representative?
never asked them to have a meeting. It was always a staff person.
May I, Chair?
Not,
I would say, and Katie, go ahead and correct me if I'm wrong or supplement to what I'm about to say. I think that staff was setting the meetings in accordance with the expectations
Absolutely.
and statute and or board rule. And as always, if there are members of the committee who say, you know, I'd really like us to discuss this, or I'd like us to meet in February because we want to discuss potential legislation. Staff is always open. We're always open to that feedback and happy to convene meetings.
it was.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands. I'd entertain a motion.
I'd love to.
Member Lear, please.
I don't want to hug this, Leanne, if you want to make motions, or Molly. The motion is that the committee approve the amendments to board policy 5003 and forward to the board for approval.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve the amendments to board policy 5003 and forward to the board for approval. Seeing no other discussion, all in favor say aye.
Yes. Aye.
Aye. That passes with 4 aye votes and 1 absent.
Sorry, Matt, I just want to, I don't know if I needed to be recognized, but I would just like to say again, Katie, I hope we can, and I'm happy to talk with you, I hope we work to get that committee maybe consolidated as 1 or 2, whatever you think is most valuable. And I know we need to work with the legislature to do that.
Thank you, Member Lear. Thank you, Katie, for being here. The motion did pass. I know. We're breezing through, and I'm gonna give Vice Chair Carey a hard time, tell him he's the one who kept us here so late last night.
Yes.
Which one are we on?
We're on this one. Let's go to this one. Actually, would be great.
Okay. Okay, let's move to 1.12 R277-626 Special Needs Opportunity Scholarship Program. And again, Ben Rasmussen will start.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the Special Needs Opportunity Scholarship Program. We've had this rule in place for, well, it seems like a year or 2 now that they've been working with the scholarship provider to provide these scholarships to students. Based on the experience with this, they have added some updates to the requirements that they want to make for the scholarship provider in this rule. You'll see they're adding some demographic information they want to receive on the students receiving the scholarship, updated some information on reports provided to staff. We have added on line 75 some language clarifying what scholarship funds can be used for based on some misunderstandings that have been seen with the scholarship provider. And then we've done some technical updates throughout the rule. Tammy Gear helps administer this program. She's here in the boardroom. If you have questions about the program, she would be happy to help me out with this. So with that, we'll take questions.
Tammy, is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. Can I just ask what sparked these changes? Was there some unclarity? Was there some confusion on scholarship programs? Why is this before us today?
So thank you, Tammy Gear, Fiscal Data and Access Coordinator. There were some issues that came up. There's a couple of things. Number one, we had to update all of the numbers from the code. But we've had some issues with when it came time to present to the Public Education Appropriation Committee, we did not have all the information that we needed. And so we have put together some templates for it, and we wanted to make sure that those things that they're asking for are submitted to us in a timely fashion.
Thank you. Any other questions, Member Lear?
Just one. How many students, Tammy can say this is just a very short question. How many students are currently participating in this program?
I could grab my computer. I could tell you. It'd
Could
take me a
you
minute.
give me a guesstimate?
It's less than 1,000.
Thank you.
Any other questions from committee members? Okay. Member Lear.
I will make a motion. Thank you. I move that the committee approves R277-626 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-626 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Seeing no additional discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That passes with 4 aye votes and 1 absent. Our next agenda item is 1.13, R277-718 out of school time program quality improvement grants, and Ben Rasmussen again will cue us up.
Thank you, Chair. So 718 is up for its 5-year review. I've reviewed the rule with staff. This program is ongoing and they have asked that it be continued without changes. Robert Palmer and Emily Berry are the staff members who can answer your questions on this, and they are on the Zoom meeting if you have questions.
Any questions from committee members? Robert, can you talk to us about this rule and what it's been doing for our system?
Well, thank you so much. Yes, this is a wonderful program. This helps out of school time, which is after school programs. It helps to improve their quality through these fundings. We have grantees that are able to make sure that the academic outcomes that are required by our other grants, our intergenerational poverty grant, our partnerships for student success grants, are being met. It's a wonderful program and one that we're excited to continue on with. We'll have another grant competition in the spring of next year.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for joining us here today. Member Wood?
I'm ready to make a motion. if
Please.
That's appropriate. I move that the committee continue R277-718 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion before the committee is that the committee continue R277-718 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that passes unanimously. We're going to continue on. I'm going to do this a little bit different. We're going to do agenda item 1.14, and then we're going to go back to 1.8, and then we'll finish out with 1.15.
Okay, I'm going to queue this up and then I have to go to finance. So this is just a follow up.
Please, yeah.
This is just a follow up to our action on R277-550 in full board meeting yesterday. We put the rules, the definitions from R277-552 into 550. So the amendment in 552 is just to delete all the definitions from this rule. And so if you approve draft 1, that's what this would do. And I need to be excused.
Thank you, Ben. Will you hit that? There you go. Thank you. Committee members, I do believe we have Marie Stephenson. I thought I saw her online when I first was on here this morning. I don't know if we have questions for her. If we have any questions, I know we've discussed this already. So I don't see any questions. Member Lear?
I just think we've processed all these definitions. So as far as I'm concerned, we can just approve them and because we're just moving them from one place to another.
Agreed. Member Wood, do you have we don't have somebody driving.
I'm here if you need anything.
I'm trying to get on right now.
Thank you. Marie, I think we're good. We have almost beat this to death. And so I think we're ready to make a motion. We're just getting it pulled up. Let me make the motion.
Okay.
I've got it in front of me. No, I don't have it in front of me. That's board policy.
Well, I have it here if you need it.
Member Wood, please.
Okay, I move that the committee approve R277-552 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-552 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Seeing no additional discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay. So we are going to jump back to agenda item 1.8. This is R277-700 -700, section 7, the elementary and secondary school general core. This is an amendment. Remember, this ties in with the agenda item 1.7, which was school instruction and sex education. And we've had some discussion on this already. This is in a more broad sense. Is that right, Elise? And then Elise, if you'll queue us up for any questions or background, that'd be helpful.
As we
Remember there.
As we start that like before, now we have 3 drafts. So would you mind speaking to the differences between the drafts?
That is
among the drafts?
mostly what I will
Thank
say.
you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Chair. Elise Newey, I'm policy advisor. So we have 3 drafts before us today. Again, this is similar to the rule that we discussed before. This is amending rules to make sure that they are in alignment with some recent code changes. So draft 1 is similar to draft 1 of the earlier rule. It is as simple as we could make it, just referencing the code. And that schools should comply with that code. It also makes sure that it includes that a student may refrain from participation in addition to parents. Previously, it had just said parent. So that's the change for draft 1. Draft 2 was submitted by board member Klein, and I can let board member Carey speak to that if he would like to. And then draft 3 was submitted by board member Hart.
Yeah, Member Carey, I know you just took a bite. Do you want to go to Member Hart first or? Member Hart, can you talk about draft 3?
So yeah, I recently attended a meeting with the superintendent's meeting. It goes back partially to the conversation we had before. Words are hard this morning. Where we don't need to restate policy in every single place. We need to make sure that when we do reference policy, reference statute, we are reflecting it like it's written. So there's not, the problem is when you get stuck in between a rule and a policy, a rule and a statute, and then you're in the space where, words matter. And it's just, we don't need this extra verbiage. I think there was another change. If you can scroll, or somebody.
For section 7, we just have those 2. Is there other parts in the rule or?
That's it.
Yeah, this is all. We just have those 2,
Oh.
Molly, that are on the screen.
Yeah, what was the?
Sorry,
Yeah,
Director
but-
Stallings, Deputy
Yeah, but
Stallings, do you have
in version 2, I'm talking about the difference between version 2 and version 3. Because version 2 asks for it to be expanded.
Is this
and
what
what
you're familiar with, Member Hart, on
Yeah,
the screen now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So see how in lines 14 through 16, it expands it. It's not necessary to do that, and it, quite frankly, is excess.
Wow, I don't know about that.
What's that?
Sorry, that was Member Carey speaking under his voice with a hot mic. Or
Oh,
speaking
gotcha.
under his breath with a.
I said I didn't know about that to your summary of draft 2. but I'll make it easy. Having read draft one, I guess part of my concern is there were no drafts until Member Klein submitted this one, and then there was a plethora of drafts. But having understanding that unusual timeline, having read draft one, I am fine with the language of draft one. So I don't think we need to address any alleged deficiencies in draft two.
And there's still.
The draft, I'm speaking though on the draft 3. The other piece, I think, adding the words "and parent" to the core standards. The issue is that it needs to be a conversation between students and parents, how the parents are responsible for the promotion when the student is refraining from something that is required for a class. Do you see how we added?
Yeah, can I ask?
Yeah.
I just have a question, if I may. It says here, the parent shall be responsible for the student's mastery of core standards. Who's responsible now?
Well, this is due to the new rule where students
But
can
even if
object.
the new rule weren't there, who is responsible now? It says, because the way it reads, it sounds like this is a new thing. The parent should be responsible for the student's mastery of core standards. Isn't that the law today? So why, if we want to talk about extraneous language, isn't that repeating what the law is?
This is due when a student now has the right to object and opt themselves out. We still have to ensure that the student meets the requirements of the course. And before, the school taught the material. The students didn't opt out. They didn't have an opportunity to opt out. So now that they opt out, we need to be able to make some sort of plan, and the plan should have the parents' involvement in that. It isn't just the satisfaction of the school that matters, it's the satisfaction of the school and the parent.
Thank you, Molly. We have Member Wood with a question or a comment.
Yeah, I spoke to you on Monday about my concern with draft 1. I'm just wondering, is draft 3, and you said you were following up. Do you remember that conversation on Monday?
Vaguely, but draft 3, yes, addresses the.
Well, okay. I wondered if you had helped work with draft 3 on the. I'm just saying we were talking about timing of drafts. You and I had talked about this before any drafts were released.
So I had seen draft 3, and I appreciate the fact that it's clear in draft 3 that parents have a part in this. That we can't hold a teacher. If I have a single educator in a classroom, and 3 students opt out for various reasons, the teacher doesn't have to now create 3 additional assignments, but they can say, that's fine, I support that. Let's work with parents. Here's what I have. And if parents don't like it, then parents can say, well, here's what we suggest, and they can work together. But it does put some responsibility on the parent.
And that was my major concern with
Draft
eliminating
1.
all of that language, is that somewhere the student has to be accountable for learning. If we're going to hold our schools accountable, then it has to fall back somewhere.
This goes back to the question of the integrity of the system, right? If we just allow not allow, because students are allowed, but if we don't hold any sort of standard, for example, if they're in a history class and they opt out of a history assignment, they're probably going to get another historically based assignment.
Well,
right? It's not going to be go run in PE for 20 minutes.
It's not just that. By adding "and parent," it used to say the parent shall be responsible for the mastery of core standards to the satisfaction of the school. And it's not that a parent has to satisfy the school. It needs to be to the satisfaction of the parent and the school. It needs to be a collaborative exchange there where both parties come away satisfied.
Okay, we've got member or Vice Chair Carey has a comment, and member Lear, you kind of raised your hand. Okay, so let's get Carol first, and Angie wants to say something as well. So we'll go in that order if you don't mind, Vice Chair Carey.
I was looking at this similarly to Molly, but a little differently. And I think this rule is not like some other opt-outs where it's an optional course or an activity or an activity or a extracurricular program. These are the core standards. So that's why I think it's especially important to say that if the student opts out of a core standard, then the parent and the school work together, because the student still has to satisfy that core standard. And so I like the way she's phrased it. I like the minimal language, and I very much appreciate draft 3.
And that's what I just want to solidify that we are, right now, I know we're talking about draft 3. That's where we've talked about different drafts. I know Vice Chair Carey mentioned he prefers draft 1. We've got preferences of draft 3. We're discussing any kind of amendments or thoughts on draft 3 presently, just so we're all on the same page. Is that fair to say? Okay, so Deputy Stallings and then Vice Chair Carey.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one more piece of feedback that we received after draft 1 was posted, that I think also was brought up at USSA, at least it was to me, maybe behind the scenes, or not behind the scenes, but maybe not where Vice Chair Hart heard it, was a question of whether in draft 1, you'll see that it states a student or parent may refrain from participation, and that's absolutely legally accurate. That is the case. But when we strike the language that states that if a student opts out of it, that it made it implied that no longer the LEAs may possibly no longer be able to ask a student or a family to make sure that the student in fact met the competencies, or if they opted out of a course, for example, that meant that the school had to just give the credit for the student. And although I don't think that anyone, I can say that staff or others, when we drafted draft 1, it was not to say the LEAs have now lost that ability. That was something that was brought up, that implicitly striking it might send a message to LEAs or parents and create that expectation. And that is why draft 3 has some minimal amendments. And also, as Vice Chair Hart mentioned, the addition of "and parent" is actually reflective of the reality. That's the reality now. If a parent, prior to HB 348 passing, if a student or family objected to a portion of the course, it wasn't that the parent had to answer to the LEA and say, this is what we want. It was actually the parent still had a choice, and the student could still refrain.
And Deputy Stallings, I did hear that, and I am just not firing on all cylinders this morning. The problem that everybody, not just superintendents, but many others are asking is what does this mean for our core standards? Are our core standards actually core standards when a student can refrain? What happens then? And we have an obligation to clarify that and still hold to a level of assurance that students that graduate with a diploma have met the standards that diploma reflects. So there's that.
Vice Chair Carey, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess if we want to look at this language, my concern is, again, we're shifting the burden. I think the law, as I'm reading it now, it says when a student refrains from participating in any aspect of school, this is what's supposed to happen. The burden isn't on the parent. The way this language reads is all of a sudden, magically, the parent's responsible for the student's mastery of core standards. That's not what the statute says should happen. The burden does not shift to the parents because that's a punishment, because we're doing something that wouldn't typically happen the way this is reading, the way I'm reading this.
Well, no,
said-
if at any time, parents have been able to opt out of basically anything at any point in time already. We are constantly, a parent wants to change a schedule, wants to teach, doesn't want their child to take Utah studies or digital lit. And we have a conversation about how to move forward. And all this is saying is that just continues. We're not shifting a burden, but we still do have a responsibility to we can't just,
let me tell you what the law says. The law says that if there's a refraining, not an opting out, if there's a refraining from participation in any aspect of school, the school, not the parent, not the guardian, not the student, the law says the school may offer an alternative that does not violate the student or the student's parents' religious beliefs or right of conscience. My concern with this language, it places the onus, the burden, the responsibility on the parent because it says the parent's responsible. No, here it says the school may offer. So if you want to fix this or remedy this, what it should say is if, a portion of the course or its entirety, the school may offer an alternative that does not, it should mirror or at least at a minimum reflect the legislative intent, which is made clear.
Does the law say may?
Yeah.
May offer?
Mm-hmm.
So Deputy Stallings, I do want to hear from her. If it's okay, Deputy Stallings, before you go, there's got to be some middle ground. We've got legislatures who they're very sharp and they hear from their constituents, but they don't always understand what LEAs are experiencing. I have to believe there's some misunderstanding or miscommunication on both sides, right? What is expected of us and what we can do under our obligation, right, to provide a free and appropriate education. Angie, please.
And these are very difficult issues. And I know we had started trying to come up with some language with 631, which was the rule that was broader than just this course, the courses and the graduation requirements. And I think I'm hearing, first, you're absolutely right. Board Member Carey, it does say that an LEA may, provide an alternative. And part of that is because there's going to be some elements where no alternative is necessary. If a student chooses not to go to an assembly, for example, or not to participate in, an after school fair at, et cetera. Those are not things that are necessary to student academic achievement, progress, mastery, graduation, et cetera. And at one point we did kind of address in that draft, we started to try to address that line between penalty and rewarding for work not done. Where is that balance? And I think that this whole discussion is part of what's going to be going on in thousands of schools. Well, maybe not 1,000, maybe students won't be refraining in all of our 1,100 schools, but a conversation like this is what parents will be having with a teacher and or an administrator in
And that's a great thing.
160 LEAs. So the part of this, if we do strike this language as is and put nothing in there, I just wanted to share that I think the message that the board would be sending is LEAs may not. If a student says, I'm not going to take the final that is supposed to be 50% of the grade, in whatever course, or I'm going to opt out of world history entirely, that there's not an expectation for a family or a student or parent to have to come up with an alternative. And
I get that, but again, what you're doing is, and what makes it, and not you are making it offensive, but the shifting of the burden is offensive because here it's clear. It's not the parent's obligation to come up with an alternative because the way Chair Hart's version, Vice Chair Hart's version reads is the parent now has to get the approval of the school. That's not the legislative intent. The legislative intent is the school has to get permission of the parent. So if you want to make it clear that these standards have to be held and they have to be met, I'm good with that. What I find offensive is the legislature has made it clear the parent doesn't have to go to the school and say, hey, do you approve of this plan? This says the school may offer. And if the parent wants to, the parent can. But it's clear here that you lose that flexibility, because what you're saying is, and I think it runs counter to the legislative intent, which was, it's clear they don't want the parents having to answer to, well, why do you want to do this? What's the belief? Do you really think smoking peyote, in prison is part of your religious belief? And the Supreme Court had to say, hey, it's none of the state's business. If they want to smoke peyote as part of their religion, let them smoke peyote. They won't even let them ask about it. But here we're saying we're going to put the school in the position of saying no to the parents, when really the way I read this is the parents should be waiting for the school to say, hey, is there an alternative? And they may not. But I would think if it's part of the core curriculum, the school has to go to that parent and say, this is the solution.
Yeah, and if I may just add one more thing, I just wanted to bring
I'd like to know your thoughts on that. Am I way off? Are you reading this and saying no?
No, I don't think you're way off. I just think it's not as, unfortunately, I don't think this is as black and white. It's not as easy to come up with the right language because it's that balance. And we're giving a couple of options that I'm hoping might spark some ideas of what the language could look like. So first, in some ways, the way you just articulated it almost sounded like the way the LEAs have been operating prior to HB 348, which was to say, when a family objects to course, because it's, and actually the language in many of those policies were, if a family objects to a portion of a course due to a religious or right of conscience, those terms were already used. The previous standard was the LEA either waived the participation requirement or the course requirement completely, or they provided an reasonable alternative. And you saw that language over in 474. It was actually language that was in that prior rule 115, I believe, or remember, Lear, you may remember the number, for different reasons that had nothing to do with the waiver process. That rule, the board repealed in 2019, primarily because the waiver processes had been in place since prior to 2007, and most LEAs had already, they had policies in place when families objected or students objected to a portion of the course requirement. So we have the language we shared with you, which is to simply change to student refrains and then make sure it's clear that it's the satisfaction of the school and parent. You have that other option I just showed where you could say something like, when a student refrains, the LEA may waive the course requirement or graduation requirement or provide a reasonable alternative. That's in their option. A third option that we were going to share with the Law and Licensing Committee last month, but didn't end up getting that opportunity because I think before the Law and Licensing Committee began, staff understood that the decision was we were going to pause on that rule. We did receive some feedback from some LEA attorneys the week of last month's Law and Licensing Committee about whether we might want to mirror some of the language that's currently in the parental rights portion of our public education code, where it talks about, and I'm just going to share it with you, mostly because I love to share options and language, was to kind of take a bit of what's already in the parental rights portion of the code about reasonable accommodations and potentially codify something. It wouldn't be word for word what this is, but the LEA attorneys felt like that could be another way of handling this. So it's not about the LEA waiving. It's not necessarily about the parent being responsible, but then somehow some LEAs shared with us some true fiscal impacts to some accommodation requests that have been made legitimate requests have been made by families due to their religious or right of conscious beliefs. And I'm going to share one that's just the one that's popping to my mind that somebody shared with us. It's an actual request and the actual cost to an LEA. Interestingly, I won't name the district, but a family shared with the district that they did not want their student using PowerPoint, the tool PowerPoint, and that they felt like it was against their religious belief, and they had their reasons for it. So as part of a course, PowerPoint was a tool that was
it their
used.
religious belief or right of conscience?
They said religion, and they actually cited a portion of scripture where they felt like PowerPoint was part of their religious belief. So the LEA had to, the course that the student was in, PowerPoint was a tool that was a tool that was used often. And the LEA had to come up with a optional or different tool that the student could use. And it did cost the LEA some money. I only give that, probably wasn't enough. And even the person who shared it with me said, you know, if we have 1 or 2 students who need either a different textbook or they need a different software tool, that's not a concern. But when either you have a number of students that need accommodations or a substitute tool or request is very costly. I only share that with you because it kind of gets into this language about balancing the right of parents, the educational needs of other students. For example, when one student, what they may want could actually impact their classmates, for example. And we haven't really gotten into that.
We do that all the time with our special education students, right? I mean,
absolutely.
We value every dollar we spend. We want to spend
Correct.
it. And so I don't see
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Remember, Karen, I apologize if it's sounding that way. I'm trying to state that we do have language already in code about reasonably accommodating that we could use, somehow refine or draw upon for 700 if needed. Because the language, it sounds like you're not concerned, for example, with draft 3. We might be able to do something around the reasonable accommodation.
The problem is.
Thank you.
Oh.
No, you're good. Go ahead, Member Hart.
The problem is that when you're talking about a core, you're probably talking, you're talking about a graduation requirement. When a parent or a student refrains for right of conscience or religious belief, they generally want to be part of a conversation on how to still get that credit. Because the option of the school is to say, well, you've opted out, fine. That's totally your right. You are no longer going to be able to meet the requirements for a core class, which means you are not meeting a graduation requirement. It automatically triggers a conversation that needs to be collaborative about what the parent wants to do next. There has to be a conversation. Do they want to take an online course? Do they want to do a different assignment? Do they want to do an independent study? Yeah, a school could theoretically bear the burden of saying, here, this is what you have to do. But you're right back in the same situation where a parent has to decide, well, that's against my right of conscience too. You automatically have to trigger a conversation about what the next step is. The school shouldn't, in my view, just simply say, here's the option, here's your option. That's all it is. It has to be a conversation for which the parent who has the objection, which the school has no problem with, is not going to ask about, but they have a right to say, what do you want to do next? That's all. It's not a punishment, a burden, a judgment, or anything. It's simply saying, okay, let's step forward. Are you just not wanting the credit? What's your plan? That's it. That's all. You can't just sit there. It's not an option to just object and be done. that's not realistic.
Thank you, Member Hart. Let me see if I can, because we keep having similar conversations and similar thoughts come into my mind. I think we might be at two different places, and help me understand if I'm incorrect here. Vice Chair Carey, as he sees the law, simply is saying, yeah, it just doesn't add up. Regardless of what educators or LEAs have to go through, it doesn't match the law, right? You're looking at this not as I would guess you're looking at this more like a lawyer. Is that accurate?
See, now that laughter makes me nervous because that, no, let me, and yeah, I don't know, just the good ones.
Shots fired. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so let me just say this. Let me say this, and Carol knows a thing or two about extreme lawyers. Let me say this. If we were to substitute where it says the parent shall be responsible for the student's mastery of core standards, my suspicion is if I were to suggest we change parent to school, so the school should be responsible for the student's mastery of core standards to the satisfaction of the parent, I think that would receive a lot of blowback in this committee because we would look at that and say that's not fair. The school shouldn't be responsible once the parent or the student refrains. I don't want to be, and I'm not oblivious to the ramifications of this law. I think there's going to be a lot of tumult, but we decided, this committee, when we had the opportunity to write a rule clarifying it, when we had the opportunity to give guidance to the LEAs, we decided as a body that it was in the best interest of the students and the best interests of all the stakeholders not to do that. But now we're going to revisit this, and instead of writing a rule, apparently take a piecemeal approach and say, well, here we'll give them this advice and here we'll give them that. My concern again is it doesn't say here in the statute, it is the parent's responsibility. It remains with the school.
If you will,
and I do have an amendment.
I was going to say, if you have an amendment, let's consider it, but let's hear from Member Lear before we go.
And I was really trying not to get into this bickering match, and I will make this comment and then wait to hear an amendment, and then I'm not going to do this because I see it very differently, and I will not vote for, as I felt coerced to not be able to put a rule in place that would have put more blanket sort of explanations of these issues in one rule. I don't think that the body voluntarily, at least my one vote of that body, did not say, oh, great, this is a better idea. I think a rule would have been a better idea, but I felt coerced into doing the other. So just to clarify my position on that, I'm kind of surprised that Member Carey talks about this being a burden to parents, because in all the other discussions we have about parents' rights and parents and the curriculum and their students, they welcome the opportunity to help their students with their education and take on the responsibilities of finding better places for their students than sometimes traditional places. So I don't see it as a burden for a parent who doesn't want their child, his child, her child, in some kind of a core class. I don't see it as a burden. I don't see it as a punishment. I see it as a necessary and appropriate transition from the school taking responsibility to ensuring core standards are taught, which the beginning of this rule says, a necessary shifting if parent says, I don't like that one, to say, okay, parent, then it's your responsibility to find that. Certainly, as Molly pointed out over and over and over, the school would collaborate, the school would work with, the school would provide extra help or resources to the extent of resources available. So I think that that is certainly something that will happen. It'll be a collaboration. But I think that the parent wanting, in almost every other case, to help with the student's education and not liking this core standard would take on that responsibility for the school. So I can listen to other language, but I very much like the simplicity of draft 3.
Thank you, Member Lear. Vice Chair Carey, have you been speaking with legislature? This is I was kind of building up to whatever at this question. It seems as you read the law, you seem unmovable, and I don't mean that in a bad way, because oftentimes that's a good thing. On your interpretation and how you read this and how you believe it should be written down and carried out, have you worked with the legislature on this, or talked to the maker of the bill, or is this again just how you have read and understand it to understand its intent, please?
Yeah, so, and I believe this is the bill. I believe this is the bill that passed with no opposition in the House. And in the Senate, there were 1 or 2, but it was a veto-proof majority that passed it out of the Senate. So you have 100% of the House saying, we understand what this bill means. We need it as a state. They pass it. Goes to the Senate. Veto-proof majority looks at this and says, probably a little too much, but they on board with it. Goes to the governor. He signs it. And I bring that legislative history up because this was not a close call for the legislature. And it's my understanding that a primary role is legislative intent. We're not here to come up with what we think is the best. It's my understanding we're supposed to look at legislation and say, what did they want to have happen? Even if it runs counter to what I believe personally. But my suggestion for this would be, my biggest concern is not that they meet core standards. They have to. And I think that's implied in the law. My concern with the language here, and I do have an amendment, would be that we shift the burden. So instead of the school, it says the school may offer an alternative. All of a sudden we're saying, no. The parents bear the responsible. If you're responsible, that means it's your duty, it's your obligation to come to us and say, well, you opted out. What do you want to do? I don't believe that's what this says when it says schools may offer an alternative. And here we make it so that that responsibility, when I say burden, I think Board Member Lear, the wrong definition of that. I didn't mean burden in terms of weight. I meant burden in terms of responsibility. Whose responsibility is it? And here we make clear it's the parents. That's not what this says. So my amendment would be, after in its entirety under section 53G 10205, I just think we take the language. The school may offer an alternative that does not violate the students' or the students' parents' religious beliefs or right of conscience. And we can add stuff about meeting core standards. We can add stuff about all of that. But my bigger concern is, I don't think the legislature woke up and said, we have nothing else to do. Let's just pass this legislation, which could upend education in the state of Utah. I think, like us, they were hearing complaints from constituents about difficulties in getting these LEAs. Some. But I think this was their solution to what they perceived as an ongoing concern in different areas of the state. And I'd like just to pass a rule that reflects what I understand to be their legislative intent. And I think this amendment does that.
So will you look at this amendment, make sure it's correct here, you're amending lines 11 to 14, you are adding, the school may offer an alternative that does not violate the student or parent's religious belief or right of conscience. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, that mirrors the actual law.
So, okay, so there's a motion on the floor then. And the motion is that the committee amend lines 11 through 14 to read, if a student refrains from a portion of a course or to a course 11, or to a course in its entirety under section 53G-10-205, the school may offer an alternative that does not violate the student or parent's religious belief or right of conscience. I see we have some discussion. I'm going to jump in quick. I've been holding this question here. One of my concerns, I don't have a concern. I don't have a problem with the school offering an alternative. I really don't. I think most, if not all schools, always offer an alternative. They don't just say, yeah, you're on your own, parents. I do think that I'm hesitant to open the door, because if the school offers an alternative that the educator or even principal or group, whatever educators feel helps or goes away from the right of conscience, and the student says, nah, try again. Like, how many tries, you know what I mean? Like, I get the school can offer one, and then that's their burden, and then it's the parent's burden, right? That's where I'm trying to look at this.
That's what this law says, right? It says they may offer an alternative.
They may, that's why I asked, may offer an alternative, an alternative. So yeah, if we're saying words matter, then agreed. I can't, even if this passes, I can't in good conscience say to LEAs, and that's what I kept hearing, and maybe that's what the committee heard, is the burden is on you, meaning you figure it out. If they don't like the second option, try again. Third option, nope. Fourth option, the LEA is just like, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore. And then again, the integrity of our program suffers. So I'm gonna hear from Member Wood, and then we'll go to Member Lear.
So having been in various situations with my two districts in this whole summer, I mean, I feel like I've been on a listening tour all summer with different conferences and such. This law, they are sitting around trying to consider possible scenarios. Like, they are looking at worst case scenarios of how do we apply this. And this parent shall be responsible for the student's mastery is not new language. It isn't because this passed we now put the burden on the parent. This has been the way it is that if you choose to remove your child from a certain section, or a child chooses to remove, then there's some consequences to that. And so we as a body are over the general control and supervision of the public education system. That's our role as a body, is to make sure this system works. And unfortunately, sometimes it has to work for the majority of kids to get to work. We don't have the funding or the people or the buildings to do a one-on-one for every single child. When we talk about IDEA and SPED, we have additional funding that comes with that. We have specific teachers who deal with that. And so I appreciate the addition of the language from the actual code, and that it allows them to do something. But I need something that says, okay, if you choose not to participate in that, then there's got to be some consequences. You can choose your actions, but sometimes you can't choose your consequences. We have to support the system as a whole. I fear what this will be. And I too would like to have had some direction through a role, but I feel like we were told very specifically from a representative, you're not doing it the right. And if we were just going to be being told we weren't doing it right, it was easier to not do it at all. And so I will accept this language, but I need to have something the next step is that the parent, somebody has to be responsible for that student's mastery of core standards. And if the parent is going to continually saying, nope, that doesn't agree with my beliefs, then that responsibility needs to lay back on them.
Thank you, Member Wood. And I hope it's clear to LEAs, it doesn't mean an easier assignment. It doesn't mean an unrelated assignment, right? It just might be a different option. So, Member Lear.
My concern, Chair Hymas, was similar to yours. You offer one fact. I heard the same story that Angie repeated about the PowerPoint. And in this version I heard, the school did exactly that. Well, what if we do this? And the parent said, nope, we're not okay with that either. And then the school said, well, what if we do this? And the parent said, nope, can't do that either. Those violate our religious rights. And so there was an impasse between the school and the parent. And so this is not just a hypothetical concern. At least one version of this says this happens. And I experienced it also where the parent really wanted to wear down the school to say, all right, we'll just waive the core requirement. So I'm also concerned about offering an alternative and then another, and then the expectation that it's another and another and another. And my question to Member Wood is, if this were to have another sentence on it or phrase that said, and if there's no acceptable alternative after the first, then the parent assumes responsibility for the satisfaction of the requirement. Then I could, live with this, but I cannot shift to LEAs. And I am very reluctant to read into the legislator's intent. I'm willing to look at the words, but I'm not willing to say, well, this is what they intended. I'm in their heads and I know that. Because I'm hoping that some of them who are teachers realized the burden this would put on schools and individual classroom teachers. So if you want to add a sentence to the end of that says, and I can try to repeat that, Angie, I don't know if you even, then I would offer to amend the amendment and say, yeah, one alternative. But then it becomes the parent's responsibility.
Yeah.
And I'd only do that in the spirit of compromise. I'm still much prefer draft 3 language.
So, Board Member Lear, it's funny you say that because I was kind of thinking, and I didn't have the language, right, but it would almost be to have a version of what Board Member Carey is proposing, and then something about the parent being responsible at some point if there can't be a consensus. And I'm not. So I started drafting in the shared doc this version. Not that is that what you're trying to say, Board Member Lear? You would say, let's take Board Member Carey's, but then add something about the parent responsibility. Is that what I'm hearing?
Right. And I think, but I guess I'm a more finite person, and I don't want to say at some point the parent assumes responsibility.
Right.
I want to say after the school or and this is only a reluctant alternative to draft 3, which I'd rather go through. And pass. But if we added something and then after the school offers one alternative, the responsibility, if the school offers one alternative and I don't want to put it all in the hypothetical and speculative because it just gets long. But if there's if there's no satisfactory alternative after one suggestion or after one offer, the parent shall be responsible for the student's mastery of core standards. But I don't want to suggest that the school has to keep offering and creating, because the burden's going to fall on individual teachers. And even 3 students who have an alternative need is a lot of burden on a classroom of 30 students. So I
just took her language. and then I've made it. Sorry. What I did, because you have to do a little bit of different, like you probably need to put the prior to the student's promotion to the next course or course level if you're going to add two things.
And I'm fine with that.
And so what I did is took that, and then this is the language you proposed, Board Member Lear. And then this, oh wait, no, this is the language Board Member Carey proposed, and then this is the language that you.
And I keep saying, it's for me to propose something, it's got to say after one offer.
For suggestion.
Yes.
One of you, no your mic down.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Oh, no, pun intended.
I wondered if we did do something like that, because I just thinking, and we could wordsmith something, but it says if the parent/student does not accept the school's alternative assignment, I think that would offer the clarity of saying there's not a whole list of things that you can do. Now, the school may have a list, that's up to them, but if the parent says, I'm not accepting that assignment, the parent shall seek other methods of obtaining credit.
Well, I just would prefer to say the parent shall be responsible for the student's mastery of course standards. And because he could do it by competency, he could do it any way he wants.
If you go to core standards, my only thought there is core standards seems to be like an entire class, where I think most of the time we're talking about a unit of a course.
Oh yeah. I don't know. I think it's just as, I think the more likely, and again, as I heard a little more of the story that Andrew repeated, it was the issue covered the whole course. So of the portion of the course.
Let me get you.
Sorry, Board Member Lear, what I was saying is, instead of saying something, it does sound pretty lofty and grand when you say this, the parent needs to be responsible for all the core standards. What if we just repeated the language that's at the beginning of the phrase that says, if a student refrains from a portion of a course or to the course in its entirety, we just repeat that and say, if the offer provided by the LEA is not acceptable to the parent or accepted by the parent, either way, the parent shall be responsible for the student's mastery of the portion of the course or the course in its entirety refrained from, or something that was refrained from.
Yeah, whatever they refrain from. That's what I'm saying. I don't want to.
Yeah,
I'm hesitant to make.
I hate ending sentences with prepositions, but I'll make an exception. Something up with which I will put. To quote somebody famous.
Accepted by the parent or acceptable?
I'm sort of kidding. Oh, no, it is not acceptable. I'd say accepted by the parent. I guess it has to be the parent and student, or the parent and student, or can we just say parent assuming student? Why don't we just say accepted? Is that too open-ended? The parent shall be responsible. Let me ask Chair, Vice Chair Molly, if that, how she feels about that as a practitioner, and given that her fix was, I think, simpler.
I'm really torn, because I think 3 said what practically is the reality. But if we want to say that, if we want to just say exactly what the law is and then just say to LEAs, then they may or may not offer something, but they also have the right to just not extend credit, then I guess that's fine. But I don't want to obligate districts to more than what the law obligates. So if we say, just stick with the language that says, of the straight interpretation that Students can opt out and the school may offer an option. What that says is the school doesn't even have to, and the student doesn't have to get credit. So leave it that way. But I am not going to add obligations to an LEA that are not stated. If we are not going to interpret it in one way, I'm not going to interpret it in the other way either. It's just going to stand, and schools will say, sorry, you don't get credit. You're going to have to go somewhere else if you want that diploma.
So
That's
Matt, can I
right.
just, so you're saying you prefer Member Carey's original amendment?
No, I prefer my own, but in the
As do I.
In the absence of my own, I don't want to obligate an LEA and
To anything.
Okay. So it's one of the two. I don't want to compromise on it because that's just not fair.
Let me make a motion.
Give me the microphone.
Oh, no.
It's okay. No, thank you. Both of you, perfect. I want to remind the committee that we're 5 people and that we vote however we want and for whatever we want. And I know sometimes we see an amendment and then we start building on these amendments to try to make it better when in reality we like what was already drafted. So I just want to remind committee, because I think sometimes we fall into this trap of just, let's look at the amendment and then let's just tweak it to how we like it when we already like the original. So just bring that back to you. We can bring up whatever we want. Agreed. So I know, Member Lear, you said you had a motion. Vice Chair Carey has been waiting patiently. And so let's go to him and then we'll go back to, and then we do have an amendment on the floor. Yeah, I don't know if we've added Member Lear's to the bottom of this. I know we were working on it, but there's no motion. Okay. So right now we're just talking about Member Carey's amendment. Okay, Vice Chair Carey, go ahead.
Yeah, it always takes me aback a bit at what I perceive sometimes as this hostility to parental involvement in the education of their children. I've seen the patience, the mercy, the kindness that we extend to educators who mess up, do bad things, do awful things, and let's keep them in the classroom. Let's give them another chance. Let's monitor them. And we make those accommodations because it's what we do in terms of this, this body of education. And we do the same thing with students. Student that's struggling, a student that may not get it the first time. We work with them. We give them alternatives. But wow, when it comes to parents, you get one shot and you better get it right. Because if not, we're going to dump all this work, all this effort that teachers toil at every day, and it's going to fall right into your lap. And I don't know where that comes from, because we're willing to give that deference to educators who come before us in executive session that have made sometimes gross mistakes. And naturally, we do it for students. But if a parent wants an accommodation, nope, you get one shot. I don't understand that. So I would speak out against Board Member Lear's amendment in that regard. I don't think a one and done when it comes to the education of a child is the appropriate stance to make.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. Member Lear and Member Hart, I don't know if you're raising your hand. We all saw some facial expressions that said you had a comment, but.
Well, I just don't understand how my version that says the school and the parents work together isn't exactly what Board Member Carey just said. I'm really honestly trying to understand how saying that they work together isn't exactly that. But that's okay. I'm trying to process. That's all.
No,
I just
and
have
we,
anxiety face.
I think the entire back and forth is just, we each have this thing in our minds, right? And I think we each view it differently. Like I see this playing out in my own school and other places that I've gone. And then each of us has that in their own setting. And so it's hard for me to see through Vice Chair Carey's eyes and even Carol's eyes as somebody who's been at this for a little bit longer than me. Right? It's just, we all have different experiences and that's okay. But Member Lear, go ahead.
Well, and let me just say that I am not I've been that parent. I've marched over to East High School and made all kinds of, wouldn't like to call them demands, but I've had discussions with educators, and sometimes they agreed with me and sometimes they didn't. And I've been the teacher who had that same experience as a much younger person. Even as a grandmother, I've made contacts to schools in Washington State and had very collaborative conversations. So I am not anti-parent at all. I also am very aware of the numbers, how they quadruple when you talk about parents compared to students in a class, and one teacher in a class. I'd like to make a motion, and then we can vote it down and move on to something else, and it would be a substitute motion. And I move that we pass draft 3, and I don't have it in front of me. I move that the committee approves R277-700, Section 7, Draft 3 on first reading, forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-700, Section 7, Draft 3 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Do we have discussion to this motion?
Oh, I've got to go.
Seeing none, we're going to do a roll call vote just so we can be clear on this. So Member Hart, we'll start with you.
Yes.
Member Lear? Member Wood?
Yes.
Member Carey?
Wait. No.
Thank you for being heard. I vote yes on this. So this passes 4-1. As we go forward with this, I don't know, I get that this is passed right now. It still has to come before the board. Can I ask staff, again, I know that this is already passed, how much have we worked with legislators? If we're talking about big numbers, just pushing this through, part of me worries that it was such a good idea and it went so fast and so easily that sometimes you don't see the effects. And so that's kind of what I'm worried about. I think the intent is on point. I love what they're trying to do, but I don't know if they had the ability to have those discussions around what does that look like on the ground level. Can you speak to that?
I can speak to that. Yes, Elise and I did meet with Representative Acton. We had a lovely meeting. I don't want to speak too much to the meeting because it was not meant to be a. No, this was way before the draft rule that came to law and licensing. So say early May, late April. Mostly we wanted to share with her the feedback we had been receiving from superintendents and charter directors. And I gave a presentation to the education section of the bar. They gave feedback. Just wanted to share with her some of this practical feedback that you all have been sharing today. It was a great conversation. It was lovely. I don't feel like it's my place to share her thoughts in the moment because her thoughts could have changed since that meeting. So I want to respect that. My point is we did have that one meeting, and then we did not meet after the draft rule was provided. So I did send her a draft of 631, which was the draft that came to law and licensing. And then she shared feedback with board members directly, which she also CC'd me on the exact same feedback that you all received directly. What we could do, however, I have not met with Representative Acton or other legislators regarding the changes to 700, which are a bit narrower, obviously, because it's about course requirements, graduation requirements specifically, not about any aspect of school. We could ask, we could share with her draft 3 and maybe set up a meeting, Chair Hymas, I would say maybe with you and Board Member Carey and myself, if there's others who want to, but anyway, we could set something up to ask for some official feedback on draft 3. We could share Board Member Carey's amendments, et cetera. So I'd be happy to help facilitate that discussion, and I'm sure she would welcome it.
Yeah, that was kind of along with what I was thinking. I was actually not thinking of directing staff because I know you guys are busy, but I wanted to invite Vice Chair Carey and myself and anybody else who would like to reach out to Senator Atkin, Representative.
My reservation about that.
Turn your mic on, Carol.
Sorry, there feels like there's too many on, but my reservation, I don't mind if you do that, but my caution, and not my caution, but my concern would be that that's one person's opinion, as I frequently say. And I don't want to bind 180 LEAs with one legislator's opinion or feel, and I'm using this in a more kind sense than maybe that sounds, but I don't want to feel coerced by one person's opinion when I feel like if we do this, and this is something that LEAs could support with draft 3, that then if the legislature wants to come back and say with a more heavy hand, no, we really, really mean you keep offering alternatives until the cows come home, then let them say that. But I feel like my job is more to be protective of the parent, teacher, student collaborative process.
Thank you,
So,
Member Lear. And
I have that concern.
I appreciate that concern. It's a concern of mine as well. I don't want to go in and say, hey, here's draft 3. What do you think? My initial thoughts would be, tell me about the experience of this bill, what you thought was happening or how you felt about that.
And not to belabor this too much, but what I'd love you to say is, as a charter school principal, here's my concern for my teachers.
You always throw me in that category.
Here,
there's
as an amphibious principal.
There's other schools in District 10 that are not chartered.
Yeah. But you have, as a practitioner, you've got some personal experience with how this might play out. Yeah. I can give you my 40-year-old experience.
Member Hart.
Oh, and yeah. So I guess I figured out where a little bit better where I'm at. I guess whatever we do, whatever direction it goes, there has to be something after the student refrains. So a student refrains, for right of conscience, for religious beliefs, there has to be some next step. We can't just put a period, end the chapter, and that be it. We are responsible for taking statute and turning it into rules for our LEAs. And to just say a student refrains, that's their right, period, is just not where we can. We are going to have to answer this question. Well, I guess we could, but we will have LEAs knocking down our door, and then we will have parents that need clarity, schools that need clarity. We just can't end it with a period. And I don't care who weighs in. We just can't. So whatever we have to do, I'm on board with. And I'm starting to understand. I'm starting to see it. We need to have a way forward.
Thank you, Member Hart. And we've got 1 month before this comes to full board. So as we process this draft 3 and gather more information, and we can make adjustments as needed. Member Wood.
Just a comment, during the session, I sat in a meeting with over 45 parents and teachers with the sponsor. And we had parents throwing out, well, what if my student does this? What, teachers, what if my 9th grade class does this? And there was some very much, oh, our students wouldn't do that. And so I think that, again, why we didn't do the rule. We are going to let this play out for a year and see. Okay, I'm glad that there is faith that those things won't happen, but what will?
Thank you, Member Wood. And thank you all committee members and staff members who have helped out. This has been a rich discussion. It's been great. Let's move on to agenda item 1.15. This is our final agenda item. Board Policy 1004 Advisory Groups, and we have Ben who's going to cue us up.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a follow-up to discussions we've been having in committee over the last few months. Staff has attempted to take feedback that we've heard from the committee and put that into the advisory group's policy. There are three things that we've changed in this policy. If you look in 2A2, you'll see that we added provision that the superintendent would maintain a listserv for interested persons to receive notice of vacancies on advisory groups. 2D, we've changed the provisions on, we've added language changing the provisions on whether a board member can attend advisory group meetings. So that's in 2D. And then the last change is in paragraph 5, where we just added provision on what the board can do with an advisory group recommendation, whether they want to refer that to a committee, receive the recommendation, take action, or just not receive it and just take no action. So those are the changes that have been put in this draft by staff. We're certainly open to any feedback you have there and discussion.
Thank you. We're getting that pulled up. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Vice Chair Carey, go ahead.
I want to thank Ben and his team. I know they've been working hard on this. I really like the changes. I would just add one, and I'm not going to make a motion. I just like discussion on it. D, a board member. My thinking is, can we just say a board member may not attend a meeting of a board advisory group unless otherwise specified by board leadership, and that's a change, board policy, or board policy for the advisory group. So really, I'm just looking to add.
Sorry, let's get some clarity here. 2D, you want to say a board member may not attend
a board advisory group meeting. Oh, wait, the version I have is different than what's up on the screen.
Let's get on the same page here.
You have the Google Doc.
Okay, yep, we're on the Google Doc.
Oh, am I in the wrong draft?
So this was the draft that was uploaded.
Which one are you? Oh, you in this one?
Looking at draft 1 sheet.
That's what the original language said.
Yeah, and I apologize. So,
oh yeah, that's
we could start. So that's not attend.
Attend a board advisory.
No,
Just tell us.
let me just remind everybody what happened. That this committee discussed the board policy, and then staff kind of directed staff to come up with a draft. So we took everybody's, well, Ben, I'm not going to take credit, took everybody's feedback from that discussion and proposed this first draft. So it wasn't any one board member who asked for one specific part.
yeah. So then what I would suggest is just rewriting D so it would read as follows, which is an incorporation of, I think, what your team came up with. A board member may attend the meeting of a board advisory group if specified by board leadership, comma, board policy, comma, or board policy for the advisory group.
That'd be okay instead of.
Yeah. Oh, I just saw it in there, so I thought that was I thought there was magic bean language in that.
As I heard now, I would just say more board policy.
Yeah, then that's what I would put. And Angie, I would defer to you if statutory rule writing says that allowed is better than.
No, may attend.
Okay.
It allowed seemed better to me, but I don't care.
I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, if provided by, yeah. And I think that finds the right balance, and I commend Ben and his team because I think that does find the balance, in my opinion, between the concerns expressed by all of us at our the meeting we had 3 months ago.
Yeah.
Member, please.
Oh, sorry.
So my concern, it was specifically based on quorum. That was the concern I brought forward, is that, if all of us, if 8 people decided to attend, there was some hot button on an advisory committee agenda, and so we all tried. So that was the only concern that I had. I prefer the by invitation because I know that when we interviewed Member Bogus, Member Green, and I interviewed members for I don't remember the acronym now, but it's our committee with the diversity committee. Access, thank you. I was thinking APAC, no, UPAC, no.
See if Molly knows she's not muted.
Molly, are you aware you're not muted?
We'll keep working on it.
Or I'll just tell her.
Oh, there she goes.
You're muted.
She's usually so I'm glad it's someone else.
So,
It's like a pain.
Okay.
Anyway, they were open in working with that group. They said, we would love to have, any of you come and attend anytime you'd like. And so if we chose to, I've got some time, I'd love to go, to have to go through board leadership, am I allowed to go visit this? I've got the time, the meeting's today. Can I go? There's just an extra step. So
I'm fine to add by invitation in addition to.
Oh, thank you. I like the idea of reaching out to board leadership. And what kind of sparked that was these discussion. What were those called? Discussion panels, focus groups, where.
They didn't seem very focused to me.
Well, but the structure of saying, okay, for example, Matt, you've been to the last 6 committee meetings, and there's others who want to go, right? They would know who's been going, and they could say, well, yeah, right. And so they could have more control over that and say, okay, well, it's not being dominated by a certain committee. Hopefully the committee would feel more comfortable going to board leadership saying, hey, I've got a board member who likes to come and likes to speak up, but then board leadership could say, hey, yeah, you're not going, right? It takes that pressure off the committee. So I appreciate this kind of this verbiage here. I'd like it more, I don't know, if provided by board leadership. I don't know how to read that. If allowed by board, I know Deputy Stallings said something like if allowed by board leadership or provided by board policy, something along that. But I do like getting board leadership involved and the access committee might even say, hey, we'd like a private meeting, and board leadership could either say, well, too bad, or yeah, go ahead, just let us know how we can help you. So I prefer that language. Member Lear, you had a comment?
I was just going to ask a question briefly of either Angie or Dr. Norman.
Closer. I don't know how well.
Yeah, sorry. I'd like to ask a question because this was a discussion a couple of 3-ish years ago when there were some board advisory committees who felt it didn't allow for them to have free discussion. And then I sense that there was a shift in that attitude, but maybe not. But it's just a short explanation of if you think that's still the case, because I am fine. But I just
want our board advisory committees to feel comfortable, and I don't want them to have to be uncomfortable in saying, no, I'd rather not have people come. So I just want your perspective on where those advisory committees are today.
Yeah. So I'd like to give one part of it and then pass it off to Deputy Norman to give today's reality, because she interacts with advisory committees more than I do. But I just wanted to actually share some background that it was back in 2016 when the board took a very deliberate position to remove board members from almost every advisory committee with the exception of UHSAA and APAC. Those might be the only two that they continued to have board members. Board members used to be on Trust Lands Advisory. They were on the USDB Advisory Committee. Now that is one that has recently changed, but it was a very deliberate. In 2016, they said, Angie, we started creating all these board policies. It used to be called Access, used to be called CMAC. You may remember that board member Lear. And so that started in 2016, where board members felt at that time that having one board member or two board members in a committee actually gave more power to that one or two board member and took away from the rest of the board in some ways. That was why it had nothing to do with how the advisory committee members felt. It was about board members feeling like, well, if board member Lear gets to go to Trust Lands, she ends up kind of not overpowering, but directing. That was the concern in 2016, and why the board deliberately said, we don't think it's good for one advisory committee to have a board member, because the advisory committee by default ends up deferring to that board member and it becomes that board member's committee, essentially. Then a couple of years later, there were, I think you've seen, board members have wanted to re-engage with some of the groups like USDB Advisory. And then there have been some questions about when board members have attended feeling, I think you were speaking to maybe some advisory committees feeling like their speech was silenced, or they were not allowed to have a free-flowing, candid conversation because they didn't either want to offend the board member, they wanted to defer to out of respect. It's not one reason. So that's kind of been the more recent conversation, maybe 3 to 4 years ago. So Deputy Norman, do you have anything to add about how maybe committees are feeling today?
I want these advisory committees to feel there.
And I'm hoping, sorry, Dr. Norman, I'm hoping that board leadership would know our board members well enough to, I hate to have them be dictators, and this would be long-term, right? So board leadership comes and goes, but I would hope that they could see that and say, you know what, there's obviously some bad blood here. There's some power moves taking place here. I don't think any of the board leadership, from the time I've been on the board, past and present board leadership, would condone any kind of action or behavior from board members. But anyway, Dr. Norman.
Patty Norman, Deputy Superintendent of Student Achievement. I think that you've covered most of the areas, including the fact that one, they're making recommendations or advising the board, and so they make those with all of the information and expertise that they had with the board approving who is on those committees. So one is that point of making the recommendations without influence of one board member, thus speaking more heavily with that one board member's influence, rather than having all the board members attend, which they can't do because then there's a quorum if there's too many that are there. And then the other piece was there were some comments that were, when there were some board members that did attend, that were made as they were parts of some working groups as they were working through some things with iterations, and some of the comments were taken out of context and put out via social media. And during that time, the advisory committees felt very vulnerable, where they're saying, we're not elected, we're here and we're doing our best job. And those comments were really just us trying to work through some things. And so that ability to really talk through and have open conversations in a trusted environment.
That's a good point.
Thank you. So
I'd like to make an amendment.
To this amendment?
Yes.
Okay, so let me get this amendment on the floor. This is Board Member Carey's or Vice Chair Carey's amendment because it has been changed a little bit, Vice Chair Carey, does this still reflect what you're hoping to see? So now it says if invited by board leadership or provided by board policy.
It is.
Okay. So the motion on the floor is that we amend 2D to read a board member may attend a board advisory group meeting if invited by board leadership or provided by board policy. And I didn't give you an opportunity to speak to your motion. Member Wood has an amendment. What do we want to do? I want to respect the process. Do you need to speak to this additionally?
No. No, and this sounds like it'll be a friendly amendment.
Member Wood.
So, based on discussion here, I was wondering if we could strike if invited and put as approved. So a board member may attend a board advisory group meeting as approved by board leadership. I feel this, can I speak to that?
You can, yeah. We're not looking for a second. Are we all friendly with that? Any concerns with that? Instead of invitation, it's as approved. I'm guessing it puts it in the hands of the board member to reach out.
Well, it's two-way.
Go ahead.
So if an advisory committee, invited, wanted people to come and listen, had something going on, then they could invite. But also if we were interested in an agenda item, we could ask. And so it makes it a more two-way option.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is that the committee amends 2D of policy 1004 to read a board member may attend a board advisory group meeting as approved by board leadership or provided by board policy. Seeing no additional discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. That passes unanimously. We see you, Member Hart. We didn't hear you, but we did see you. Okay, so we are back to, well, there's not a motion on the floor. There is a potential motion if somebody's willing to make it, or we can have further discussion. Member Wood,
I'm willing to make that motion.
please.
Okay, I move that the committee approve and recommend the board approves board policy 1004-draft 1 as amended.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves and recommends the board approves board policy 1004 draft 1 as amended. Any additional discussion to that? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. It passes unanimously. Okay, that covers all of our agenda items. We seek one final motion. Thank you, Member Lear. We are adjourned.